Night drives in the Nevada desert teach you to trust the straight line. 2 white lane markers, a ribbon of blacktop, and a sky so crowded with stars it feels like static. But sometimes the ground opens its own geometry. Tonight on Somnolent Conspiracies, we follow a line that drops into the earth. An access tunnel sunk during the Cold War, a throat of concrete that carries flash floods under a shuttered test range. Locals call it the mouth. Lately, they've been calling it the court. The first report came from a drifter who wouldn't give his name. He said he went down there to sleep out the wind and woke to a voice-calling roll. He saw benches of vapor along the walls like breath made visible. He heard a gavel, or what the desert has for a gavel, a rock striking rock with a patience older than water. Then came the verdict, in English and something older. The name of a living man, a sentence pronounced for a crime not yet committed. The drifter ran until sunrise and kept running. The tunnel kept talking. Sheriff's deputies dismissed it as infrasound, vagrants, a bad night. Then cell video surfaced. A circle of dust lifting like a jury in their seats. Chalk lines appearing on the floor as if written by a hand that didn't care to be seen. The judge was only a deeper darkness where the roof curved. The name it spoke reached a lot farther than a hobo camp. It reached a mine, a lobby, a boardroom, and a family that thought tomorrow was their problem, not tonight's. Our investigator will have to prove the future wrong, if that's allowed, or prove who's feeding the tunnel its charges. We'll test for microphones and magnets, for pranksters and paymasters, for the way a guilty town can summon its own law. Bring a light. Bring a silence you can hold in your mouth. If you hear your name, don't answer. The desert had a way of saying don't. Don't step there. Don't breathe too deep. Don't keep secrets where the wind can hear. Detective Naomi Creed listened anyway. She drove the unmarked Tahoe off US 95 onto a service track the map pretended not to know. The morning sun a hard coin grinding up the eastern ridge. The coordinates came from Nye County Dispatch and from a rumor that arrived faster than any warrant. There was a court under the earth, and it had called a man to judgment for a crime he hadn't committed yet. 2 deputies waited where the storm fence sagged, a padlock neatly cut, coil of chain like a shed snake. Deputy Halvorsen tipped his hat with 2 fingers and tried not to look at the black tunnel mouth beyond the culvert. A slit of shadow in the concrete berm, big enough to swallow a truck. Morning, Detective Creed. Wind tugged his words sideways. You're looking at the mouth. Locals always had a name. Past month, they added another. The court, Naomi said. He grimaced. That one. His partner, Ruiz, held up a tablet. Cell video went viral after 3 a.m. anonymous. Looks clean, like no filters. But I'm not the expert. He thumbed the screen, scrubbed to the start. You'll want to see it inside, with the acoustics. Naomi nodded. She had 36 hours of sleep debt in the ledger and a habit of paying with coffee. But the desert had taught her to respect geometry, and the portal under the berm was geometry with a grudge. A perfect ellipse cut into the slope, concrete flared, the lips stained by decades of flash floods. Someone had stenciled the words above the mouth in a tidy, bureaucratic hand. Lex siccus. Dry law, Naomi said. Latin's having a week. Stencils fresh, Ruiz said. Paint cans there, no prints. Whoever did it wore nitrile, wiped the rim. Halvorsen passed her a pair of earmuffs and a respirator. In case, we had Public Works meter a low hum at the entrance. Could be infrasound off the tunnel. Could be the wind playing judge. The tunnel took the light and combed it. Naomi played her headlamp over the walls. Ribbed concrete, calcified drips like candle runs, the occasional graffiti tags softened by dust. Her boots scuffed a fine powder at the threshold that rose, unhurried, then settled again. The smell was old rain and iron. The temperature pitched down as soon as she stepped inside, like a hand had closed the door of a walk-in freezer. The first 100 feet were honest tunnel, broad as a road, high enough to make you look for stars too long and bump your head on man-made sky. Then the geometry bent. The passage flared into a chamber that wasn't a chamber. More like the belly of a poured concrete whale, a slight swell in the corridor where water, in flood season, would pause, breathe, and pick a direction. Here the floor showed marks. Arcs. They lay pale on the darker dust, 12 delicate crescents scribed in an imperfect semicircle along the west wall, as if a careful hand had drawn benches that were no one's to sit upon. At their center, a ring where the powder had been polished smooth by something round and restless, a pale disk no wider than a truck tire, no narrower than a man could pace in 5 strides. Naomi crouched at the outermost arc and touched it with a gloved finger. The line wasn't chalk. It was the dust itself, clumped by moisture into a track that read like chalk. A faint smear of red oxide flashed in her beam when she lifted her fingertip. "Desert iron," she said. "Not store-bought." Ruiz stood where the ceiling dipped. His voice fell a half-tone, as if someone had damped the world with a thumb. Acoustic meter shows a constant at 18 to 19 hertz, modulating when the wind hits the east vent. It's low enough to make you feel watched, sick, sad. The kind of note a building hums when it dreams of collapse. Halvorsen frowned. "I didn't hear anything." "You felt it," Naomi said, and he didn't argue. They set their gear at the periphery. Tripod with a calibrated mic, a second mic taped to the ceiling rib, a laser thermometer pegged at shoulder height. Naomi slipped her phone into airplane mode and switched to a clean SD card for the body cam. When she looked up from the ritual of evidence, the room had arranged itself into a kind of attention, as if the 12 arcs had tightened by a hair's breadth, asking her to take her place in the center. Ruiz brought up the video on his tablet and mirrored it to his laptop. The frame wobbled through the same mouth, the same chamber, but with more voices. Faint hoots, whispering laughter, the way teenagers make space for fear by feeding it jokes. Then the laughter skinned away. On screen, dust lifted from the arcs in narrow collars and rose to head height, hanging like breath made visible. The camera panned. There was no one in the arcs, no bodies to wear the collars. The tablet's tiny speaker gave them a man saying, without breath, without room tone, "All rise." The words arrived here, in the real room, an instant later. Not the recording, but the space itself pronouncing the phrase after the tablet, as if repeating it for those who'd missed it the first time. Naomi's skin spiked under her jacket. The deputies shared the brief look of men who had agreed not to be spooked and now had to renegotiate the terms. On screen, the camera swung to the ceiling where the vault curved from west to east, a darker seam along the apex, a shadow deeper than the other shadows, like a bruise in the concrete. The speaker said a name. It had the uncomfortable weight of proper nouns do when they are spoken in spaces built for echoes. Liam Calder. The real room did it again. Liam Calder. The air repeated, a half-beat after the device. Not an echo, not a bounce, but a second voice layered thin and grainy into the note at 19 hertz. The name pitched dead center in human speech. The video caught a sound like rock striking rock, measured, patient, and then a scramble of feet and breath and profanity as the cameraman fled toward day. Ruiz paused the feed. The chamber returned to its shy hum. He rubbed his forearms. "I've heard infrasound make people think there's a presence. I've heard it make a single word into a sentence. I have not heard it learn a name." "We'll keep the mics running," Naomi said. "I want the raw stream and the modulation. If there's a source, it has a fingerprint." She paced the arcs. The powder tracked the soles of her boots and failed to mark her passing. She could see her step, but the lines did not smear. She knelt at the central disc and slid a steel ruler gently across its surface. The dust gave a little, the way rice gives, then smoothed itself again when she lifted the blade away. "What's the ring?" Halvorsen asked. "Where feet worry at fear," Naomi said, then shook it off. "Or a tire, or a barrel rolled until the powder packed. Let's not give it poetry before we give it cause." She bagged a dust sample from each arc, labeled them, shot stills of the stenciled Latin outside, the cut chain, the paint can. The infrasound wobbled slightly, a pressure change she felt more in her teeth than ears. The laser thermometer ticked down 2 degrees and held. Naomi walked the length of the chamber to the far lip, where another branch narrowed toward daylight, and came back with her headlamp turned low. The arcs looked like seats again. She couldn't avoid that word. Seats, filled with the idea of bodies. "Who's Liam Calder?" she asked. "Safety manager at Red Mesa Lithium," Ruiz said. "Lives out near Beatty. Wife, Teen son. Any warrants? Charges? Priors? Nothing that shouts. Company's been pushing output. There was a rumor last winter about a ventilation bypass during a heat spike. Nothing on paper. Naomi nodded once. The name in the air had hit the part of her that counted consequences. If a place could pronounce a sentence, it could also gather a crowd, and crowds loved a script. She had seen trials conducted at kitchen tables, verdicts delivered in 1,000 invisible votes. But a tunnel? A tunnel could be weaponized by physics or by men who knew how to turn physics into theater. She walked to the seam at the apex and shone her light. There were marks she'd missed. Faint horizontal scratches a man might make if he stood on a ladder and dragged something heavy across the cured concrete. A microphone? A speaker? No residue, no tape halos. She set a scale card in the frame and took the shot anyway. The camera's timestamp would prove where she'd been at the hour. The internet said the desert did the talking. Detective. Halvorson's voice softened. He stood just at the edge of the central ring, boots outside the polish by an inch like a man respecting a grave. He pointed to the wall about shoulder height. The concrete there wore a shallow graffito of dates, scalloped by flood, silt, and time. She traced them with her light. 1958, 1962, 1979, 1993, 2006, and newer cuts, 2017, 2019, 2022. Next to some were initials that had bled into illegibility. Next to others, small marks like tally cuts. Mining fatalities, Ruiz said. Public list matches most of those years. Who carved them? Naomi asked. Theories include bored teens and ghosts with pocket knives, Halvorson said. Naomi took her photos. She liked lists. Lists turned haunted things into ledgers. Ledgers could be audited. Outside, the wind had risen. It shoved a note down the tunnel that made the arcs lift a powder thickness and settle again. Like a sigh. Naomi checked the recorder clock. We're done for now. Seal it. Post deputies at the mouth. No crowds. If anyone tries to set up a live stream, I want their gear bagged and their names spelled right. Ruiz hesitated. You'll want to hear this. The ham guy in Pahrump? He's been streaming scanner chatter for years. Half an hour before you got here, his feed picked up something. Same voice, cleaner. Said, hearing at midnight. Tonight, Halvorson added, as if the word itself were an offense. Midnight brings an audience, Naomi said. Let's make it bring evidence. She signed the chain of custody forms on the hood of the Tahoe, the wind trying to turn each page into a bird. Dust lifted from the berm and flowed around her boots like a creature giving way without ceding ground. She looked once more at the stenciled Latin above the mouth. Dry law, a law the flood respects only until it doesn't. Liam Calder, she said to the desert, as if testing whether the air would answer. Didn't. Good. She preferred when it didn't. On the drive back to the highway, her phone vibrated where it lay plugged into the dash. She had left it in airplane mode. The message waited, time-stamped 5 minutes earlier, arriving the moment she let the cell towers see her again. No number, no signature, just text. If Calder signs, 13 die. The court knows. Naomi glanced at the clock. 9:17. The road ahead ran straight as a drawn blade. In the mirror, the berm hunched like a dull animal growing out of the earth. She pressed the accelerator and tasted the grit of a case that had already inhaled too many names. Don't, the desert said in its old language. All rise, answered something newer in her memory. She drove toward Beatty and a house where a man might already be practicing his signature. The Calders lived in a single-story ranch house with a mesquite that had learned to grow sideways to avoid the wind. Beatty's afternoon heat wrapped the eaves like cellophane. A sprinkler coughed to life somewhere down the block and made a brief green miracle before the water turned to steam on the curb. Naomi parked under the mesquite, killed the engine, and watched her reflection flatten in the Tahoe's dark glass. She kept her jacket on. Some houses understood badges better when they arrived buttoned. The man who opened the door had a safety vest hung on a chair behind him and the look of someone who could find the nearest exit in smoke with his eyes shut. Mid-40s, lean from ladders and stairs, forearms nicked by old work. His jaw had a small tremor he controlled by clenching it harder. "Liam Calder?" Naomi asked. He nodded once. His gaze moved past her to the street, then to the sky, as if the air itself might be serving papers. "I know who you are, detective." He stepped back, performed the obligatory sweep he'd learned from televised arrests. "You want to come in?" A woman stood in the kitchen doorway with a dish towel she hadn't used. Wife, Naomi thought before the photos confirmed it. Aaron plus Liam burned into driftwood on a shelf. A 3 people in a canoe picture turned slightly to hide a smear. Aaron's eyes had the veiled brightness of someone who had practiced smiling on the drive home. "Is this about?" Aaron began, then stopped. She couldn't say the word without inviting it to sit down. "The tunnel," Liam said, blunt. "The video." Naomi kept her tone even. "I was there this morning." He watched her face for any tell. Something a place had said to her that he might need to fear. She offered him nothing but a card and the first rule of interviews. "I'm here to understand what's happening and to keep anyone from getting hurt." Aaron folded the towel carefully along its old crease, found she'd misjudged it, folded again. "We're not people who... we're not superstitious." "Neither is concrete," Naomi said. "It still falls. May I sit?" They took the dining table. It had a scar in one corner where a hot pan had misbehaved, and a school laptop open to a screen with math left mid-equation. A skate deck leaned against the sliding door, grip tape worn to a shine. Across the yard, a stretch of concrete patio had been painted with a broad white arc, half a crescent, the remnant of some improvised game. "Owen's at practice," Aaron said, following Naomi's glance to the board. "Track. He doesn't like to be in the house right now." "He goes to the tunnel," Liam said, not quite a question, not quite an accusation. Aaron's mouth tightened. "With friends. They're not the ones making trouble. They're just kids." Naomi set her phone on the table, screen dark, camera pointed at her own badge, a quiet signal that she wasn't secretly recording. "I need to ask about your job." "I'm a safety manager," Liam said. His gaze made a circuit of the room as if remapping exits. "Red Mesa Lithium. I keep the air moving and the bodies accounted for. I do the trainings everyone groans through, and I sign the pages everyone pretends to read." "Has anyone asked you to sign something you don't want to sign?" The jaw tremor again. Controlled. "Define want." "Define asked," Aaron said softly. Naomi waited. Silence worked like a solvent. Liam rubbed the heel of his hand along the table edge until the skin went pale. "We've had output goals all summer. The heat spikes make the air heavy. Old galleries heat up like radiators. The monitors don't like it. They trip into fault. Fixing them takes downtime. Downtime takes money. Morgan Corporate has been pushing for a bypass during the worst of it. Short period. Controlled. They say we'll keep the fans maxed and do spot checks with portable meters." "Morgan is?" Naomi let him choose the title. "Public relations, technically. But she's the voice from the top floor when the top floor doesn't want fingerprints." He shook his head. "They sent an email with a draft waiver. Legal boilerplate. I sign, I assume liability. It isn't illegal to have a waiver. It is unwise." He swallowed. "It's wrong." "Then don't," Aaron said, not looking at him as she said it, as if the command would shatter if aimed directly. "We'll tighten. We'll sell the truck. We'll..." "She's been told about pensions," Liam said to the table. Aaron set the towel down as if it were suddenly too heavy to hold. "I told myself it was just talk. That Morgan sends that kind of talk to everyone. That's what PR is, making fear sound reasonable." She looked at Naomi. "My husband is not a killer." "That word keeps turning up," Naomi said. "Has anyone used it to you, Mr. Calder?" His laugh had a shape like coughing. "Last night our phone buzzed so many times the charger got hot. People I haven't heard from in a decade. Strangers. A radio guy in Pahrump who thinks he's Art Bell with worse hair. And this." He reached to the counter and picked up a printed email, creases deep from being folded and gripped too long. He passed it across. "If Calder signs, 13 die." The court knows. The from field showed no name. The address was a free account in a string of random consonants that made you imagine a forehead walking across a keyboard. The timestamp was 5 minutes after Naomi's own message had bloomed on her dash. "Do you believe the number?" Naomi asked. Aaron's hand touched the paper like it might burn and return skin. "I believe if he signs something meant to keep people in the dark, people will suffocate in the dark." "The ventilation plan," Naomi said. "Show me." Liam hesitated. "I'm not supposed to." "Supposed to by whom?" Naomi asked. "You're supposed to keep your crews breathing." He stood, went to his briefcase, returned with a folder he placed on the table like a foundling. Inside, schematics of galleries laid out like veins, fan ratings, monitor placement, a maintenance log where certain entries had been stamped calibration with a date and no initials. "This," he said, tapping a line that ran like a shortcut through a cluster of rooms labeled G4 G7, "is the bypass. It would allow us to isolate segments on paper while leaving the main fan load unchanged. We'd shut down the auto shunts and handle it manually. Manual is fine when there are 3 of you and the air is still. Manual is hell when a fan throws a bearing and methane farts at you from rock." "Who proposed it?" Naomi asked. A beat. The draft came through Morgan's office. The engineering note attached is from a contractor, Eddie Voss. Good with his hands. Not good with scruples. "And your son uses the tunnel," Naomi said, moving as if changing subject, knowing it wasn't. "How much?" Aaron answered first. "He and some of the boys skate the concrete lip in late afternoon. Says the wind pushes you faster. Says it's cooler there. He was there the night before last, before. She swallowed. "He came home quiet and didn't want dinner. Does Owen know about the email?" Naomi asked. "No," Aaron said, too quick, then steadied. "He knows something's wrong. He doesn't need a prophecy added." Liam's phone rattled on the table. He flinched and turned it over face down. A second later, Naomi's own vibrated with a number she didn't know. She ignored it. The house held its breath with them, a learned reflex from too many alerts. "Mr. Calder," Naomi said gently, "I'm going to need internal communications from Red Mesa. Last quarter's safety audits, all emails referencing the bypass, any correspondence from Morgan Pike to you or your team. I can do that with a subpoena, and I will, but if you can provide them faster, people keep breathing." Liam stared at her, and the look in his eyes was a man negotiating with a trap he had built for himself out of small concessions. Aaron put her hand flat on the table until his gaze fell to it, to the simple geometry of bone and vein and trust. "I'll send them," he said. It sounded like a confession and a reprieve. "I'll send what I have. The audits are on the shared drive. The emails, Morgan likes phone calls. She leaves messages that say we'll circle back off record. But there's enough." Naomi nodded. "You'll also forward any contact from her today. If she asks you to a meeting about signatures, you will not go alone." Aaron's eyes flicked to the clock on the oven, to the door, to the skate deck, the way a mother's sense of perimeter counts differently than a detective's. "He doesn't sign," she said, to Naomi, to Liam, to the table, to the hot pan scar, to the arc painted on the patio, to the wind. "He doesn't." Liam's phone buzzed again. This time he looked. The preview showed Morgan Pike in caps, as if the name had been typed with teeth. He put it on speaker and set it gently between them. "Liam," Morgan's voice purred, carrying the echo of conference rooms and the faint feedback of someone who prefers to hear her own words twice. "We're getting some noise online. Silly ghost stories. It would be unfortunate if anyone with your title were seen taking them seriously, or if our investors thought we were guided by superstition rather than science." "I'm guided by air," Liam said, surprising himself and Aaron both. "We'll need your sign-off by Friday at 10, Morgan continued, unbothered. "Routine. Legal is comfortable. If this cyberbullying continues, our counsel is prepared to pursue damages against individuals spreading malicious fabrications. Detective." Her tone tilted, smile sharpening without warmth. "I assume you're there. It would be wise to remember this is a regulated enterprise and your presence is..." "Noted." Naomi leaned toward the phone just enough to be heard on a boardroom speaker. "Ms. Pike, this is Detective Naomi Creed with the Nevada Division of Investigations. I'll be issuing requests for your internal safety audits and communications regarding proposed ventilation changes. Please preserve all relevant documents and devices. Deleting anything after this call will be construed as tampering." Pause, small and telling. "Of course, Detective," Morgan said. "We're always happy to cooperate with the state." Then, silk over steel. "Please remind your sources that impersonating a court is a crime." The line clicked dead. Erin exhaled the way a diver measures the length of a surface. "She thinks she can scare the ghosts away by threatening lawyers. She thinks she can scare the town into not believing physics," Liam said. Naomi slid her card across the table, wrote a second number on the back. "This one rings my pocket without a log. If you feel rushed, you call. If you change your mind about sending the documents, you still call. And if anyone approaches Owen about the tunnel, anyone, I'll know," Erin said. A promise edged with something older than fear. Naomi stood. Through the slider, the white arc on the patio caught full sunlight and flipped her a memory of 12 pale crescents in dust. A breeze found its way into the kitchen and moved the dish towel a little, like a flag trying to remember the word for signal. On the porch, she looked once toward the south, where the berm hunched like a verdict still being written. Her phone buzzed with an email she already knew the shape of. PR@RM Lithium. Auto-reply. "Your request has been received." She smiled without humor and drafted the real one, the one with teeth, to the company's counsel, CCNG, the Attorney General's office. Subject: preservation notice and production request. She asked for audits, for emails, for the calibration logs of methane detectors, for the list of contractors with access to monitor firmware. She asked for Morgan Pike's calendar entries Friday 10 a.m. She asked for the names of the crews scheduled in Gallery 4. Send. The desert smelled like heat and distant rain that would never arrive. Naomi stepped off the porch and felt the subtle press in her teeth again, as if the earth were humming a phrase and waiting for her to learn the words. Midnight was coming with its crowd and its physics and its rumor. She had the beginning of a ledger and a family with a conscience and a publicist with a shredder. She headed for the truck. Behind her, the sprinkler down the block clicked off, and the green miracle receded into dust. By late afternoon, the tunnel had swallowed enough sheriff's tape to gift-wrap a courthouse. A generator throbbed discreetly behind a berm, feeding power through a snake of cable to a folding table of instruments that looked like a garage band for ghosts. Naomi signed the log at the perimeter and ducked back into the throat of concrete where the temperature slipped a steady 5 degrees and the smell of iron wrote itself across the back of her tongue. Dr. Felix Rowe arrived barefoot in desert sandals, the sort of academic who'd rather speak in sine waves than sentences. He set a pelican case down, patted it once like a good dog, and shook Naomi's hand with distracted politeness. "Standing waves," he said by way of hello, peering up into the vault. "This geometry is a hymn book." "Sing me a stanza," Naomi said. He unpacked hardware with a lover's economy. A calibrated omnidirectional mic sprouting like a silver dandelion. A compact recorder with more headroom than some radio stations. A small LiDAR unit that hummed softly as it woke and began to paint the space with invisible light. "You've got a long, gently flared conduit with a constriction to the east and a shallow bulb here. Wind speed forms a shear, creates pressure nodes. Any broadband noise." He flicked a glance toward the mouth where the day's breath moved in and out. "Gets sifted. Below 20 hertz, the ear doesn't hear, but the skin does. 19 is the sweet spot for unease. It can smear perception, induce a sense of presence, shape ambiguous speech into words you expect to hear." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "I didn't expect to hear Liam Calder." Felix smiled without warmth. "Exactly. They worked in choreographies of habit. Ruiz ran cable to magnets that clicked against the ceiling ribs. Halvorsen placed data loggers at shoulder height around the semicircle, red LEDs blinking like watchful eyes. Naomi photographed the arcs again. Still there, still delicate, still not chalk. In 2 of the crescents, scuff marks had subtly sharpened into smoothness, as if dust had flowed and found the groove by preferring it. "Where are your benches hiding?" she murmured. Felix consulted his tablet as the lidar plotted the chamber into a wireframe honeycomb of distance and probability. "We'll set the primary omni here, centerline, 1 meter off the deck." He taped the mic stand to the floor and sighted along it like a surveyor. "Secondary at the east side, cardioid pattern angled toward that bruise along the apex." Naomi shone her lamp at the seam again. "You see it too?" "Oh yes." Felix zoomed the live scan. A shallow depression, 2 millimeters, maybe. Could be pore marks, could be someone dragged equipment. If I were hiding a speaker, I'd put it up there. If I were hiding a mouth, I'd put it where everyone already expects to look. Equipment leaves glue. Mouths leave spit. Naomi took another macro. The concrete gave her nothing but the indifferent pores of aggregate. The county forensics then rolled to a halt and discharged a woman in Tyvek who introduced herself as Loya. She knelt at the nearest crescent with a scupula and coaxed a sample into a vial. "Not chalk," she confirmed without looking up. "Dust clumped by moisture with iron oxide, what the hills give you when they bleed a little. You can get it to scribe clean lines if you drag a smooth object at consistent pressure." "Like a knee," Halvorsen offered. "Like a knee," Loya agreed. "Or like wind. If the deck is already rutted and the humidity spikes as the sun drops." She pointed with the scupula at the central disc. "This is friction pressed. Whether from boots or a barrel or a circle of fools pacing, I'll tell you after I sieve it." Naomi walked the periphery, counting the bolts that fixed the wall panels, counting her own breath, counting down to midnight. On the west wall, the dates read more plainly in oblique light, history scratched into a room that had no business owning history. 1958, 1962, 1979, 1993, 2006, 2017, 2019, 2022. Some carried initials. Some were naked shrubs of numerals. She photographed each with a scale card, then stepped back to take the wall as a ledger. The pattern ran oddly regular, a township of grief beside a flood road. "Local mining fatalities," Ruiz said at her shoulder, holding a printout he'd fetched from the county archive. "Most years match, couple don't. We've got a 1983 cave-in not carved here. And 2011, 2 men lost to a ventilation failure, also missing." "Places remember what they choose," Felix said. "Or what people choose for them." "Someone curated a ghost wall?" Halvorsen asked. "We have docents now?" "Docents with pocket knives," Naomi said, but the omissions tugged at her. 2011 unscribed, when air had failed. A ventilator death the wall refused to keep. She made a note to ask the archivist who'd logged the inquest that year, who'd testified, who had reason to forget. Loya sealed her vials and stood, dust trembling in the wake of her movement. "Iron contents high enough to give you that red flash under light. No binder. If you blow on it, it'll move. Except it doesn't, not in those arcs. Like the floor's teaching it where to sit. Or a hand keeps teaching it," Naomi said, eyes on the bruise along the apex. "We'll see who shows up to class at midnight." They broke for an hour of sun while the instruments chewed data. Naomi sat on the berm and ate a sandwich she couldn't taste, thinking of the Calder's table, the hot pan scar, the skate deck leaning like a question mark. She texted Aaron, "Short check. Owen not at the tunnel?" and got back a photograph of Owen under halogen gym lights, ankles taped, a baton blurred in his fist. Relief is a muscle that tires quickly. She refused to let her slack. When the light slanted orange and the wind thought about turning, they went back in. Felix dimmed their lamps and brought up the thermal camera, a matte black rectangle with a cyclops lens that regarded the world as heat. The screen painted the chamber into gradations of false color. Naomi hated the way it made bodies look like glorified leaks. They took a baseline pass. Walls warm from the day, floor cooler, entrance hot as a throat. Then Felix killed the generator, and silence advanced like a tide. The infrasound arrived as pressure before it arrived as tone. A weight in the gums, a hand on the sternum, the suggestion that one's eyes ought to water. Felix's meters registered a slow swell at 18.7 hertz, plus harmonics climbing like invisible ivy. On the thermal screen, vertical sheets of cooler air began to descend from the apex, meniscus smooth, as if someone had tipped a jug in heaven. The sheets arced down where the crescents were, struck the deck, puddled. Naomi watched, jaw set, arms prickling with 100 false insect feet. "Those are cold plumes." "Yes," Felix whispered, as if loudness could break them. Standing waves set pressure nodes. Air moves to satisfy math. The cool you feel is really just less warm, pulled from an upper layer and poured like water. But look! The plumes folded in on themselves, each forming a collar at head height over the arcs. 12 delicate hoops hovering on nothing. Naomi's mind tried the word seats, rejected it, then had to accept it anyway because the space insisted. She counted the rings. 12, imperfect crescent of a jury. Her own breath steamed faintly in the thermal, a brief signature in a room that had learned to fake them. "Recorders rolling," Ruiz said, voice very small. The first sound was the skitter of a pebble under nobody's foot. Then a double tap. Rock on rock, patient as a metronome that expects to be obeyed. Naomi felt it in her molars. The pressure rose. Her ears told her nothing. The hair on her arms told her everything. Then a voice, thin, scraped from metal, articulated like a human mouth had handled it once and memory was doing the rest. "All rise." Ruiz's laptop hiccuped as the timecode burned a new line into disk. The phrase came again, not echo, not playback, an independent utterance sitting like glass beads on the infrasonic current. The thermal camera registered no hot throat, no warm lung, no body anywhere the sound might have left. The collars of cool quivered, tightened. "People versus Liam Calder," the voice said, and Naomi surprised herself by breathing out slowly, as if the words were a punch she could roll with. The diction had the bizarre precision of phone prompts, no accent, no breath afterthoughts. "Charge, homicide by foregone omission." Naomi glanced at Felix. He was looking between his screen and the room as if either might explain the other. "Formant analysis later," he managed. "Now a note. You can't build proper nouns from wind. Not like that. Evidence," Naomi said aloud to the ceiling seam. Her voice sounded human and clumsy in comparison. "Present it." "On the floor." The deck answered. "Chalk." "No." Dust clumping where it moved. Scribbled fast across the central disk, straight lines appearing as if a child's hand had found a planet liked. Galleries took shape, labeled by a pressure point that darkened one letter at a time. G4, G5, G6. Arrows bloomed along little corridors, airflow indicated with a draftsman's economy. At a juncture, an X flared red in Naomi's lamp, iron oxide catching like a warning light. "Maintenance hatch," Felix breathed. "That's not on the official map." Naomi fought the urge to step into the circle and smudge her shoe through the lines. "Evidence is not a dare," she reminded herself. "Your witness list is dirt and terror," she said to the air. "Put a date on it." A ripple passed through the infrasound, like a cat adjusting under a blanket. Numbers wrote themselves beside the X. September 27th. September 28th. Shift times followed, and a column of names flowered with the implacable calm of a printer. Naomi took stills until her shutter finger cramped. The rock tapped again, once, twice. The cool collars loosened, rose an inch like the gathered breath of strangers. The voice, if that's what it was, went on. "Verdict, guilty. Sentence, 13 lives for one signature." Naomi looked toward the mouth, toward the sliver of evening that still remembered being day. Her heart had the professional trick of holding steady while beating harder. She had saved a dozen names before by stopping a chain of dumb events. Chains were her métier. Pronouncements were not. Felix's recorder timecode ticked forward. Indifferent. A soldier marching under orders he didn't understand. The plumes withdrew, pouring back up into the apex like ghosts returning to their shelves. The crescents on the floor looked stupid again. Scratches and dust, a prank with better knees than their own. The central disk lay busy with lines and arrows and that fat X like a wound that had picked its own scab. Felix eased the generator alive. Light leapt. Everyone breathed the brittle laugh of survivors. The stupid, animal bark that follows a storm a second before you start acting like a person again. Loya crouched, camera on macro, documenting every stroke. If this is a hoax, it is a gifted one. If this is physics, it's plagiarizing Latin, Halvorsen muttered, eyeing Lex Sickis on the portal beyond. Naomi felt her phone vibrate through her jacket against her ribs. She let it, finishing the evidence sweep before she surrendered the data's priority to a new demand. Outside, in the hardening twilight, she checked the screen. A link from a call sign she recognized only because Felix had sent it an hour ago. The Pahrump ham with the late-night stream and a Baptist's conviction. The caption read, "The court is in session. Live." She tapped. The feed was audio only, a narrow bandwidth moan that made everything that wasn't it seem thin. Underneath, the judge's rock metronome, the stick, the gavel, the knuckle on marble, kept time with older music. A woman's voice in the comments. "My sister says keep your boys home. They're planning something at the mouth." A man's. "Looks like a prank with big words, y'all are soft." A third, "Listening now. Set a date. That's tomorrow. That's my husband's shift." Ruiz stepped up beside her, phone in his own palm, matching link open. "He's got 5,000 listeners already," he said. "By midnight, it'll be a carnival." "Not if we change the geometry," Felix said behind them, as if he'd heard a shape and not a number. He pointed his chin toward the chamber where arcs pretended to be nothing and were failing at it. "The room seats belief, so we make it stand." Naomi pocketed the phone. Shapes and belief. She had a company to subpoena, a contractor to interview, a boy to keep away from a mouth. She looked into the tunnel where math had learned to write names in dust and speak like someone impersonating God. She had learned a sentence in another language, and it would not leave her. Tomorrow is on the docket, the floor had told her in its blind handwriting. "Then we take it off," she said, and went to work. They took the carnival out of midnight by starving it. No live streams, no spectators, no chanting, no daredevils with ring lights. Sheriff's units blocked the service road a mile back, cones and calm voices, turning away pickup trucks with lawn chairs and teenagers who smelled like diesel and impatience. Naomi signed the perimeter log again and walked through the cordon into the tunnel with only the people she trusted to count what could be counted and keep their mouths shut about the rest. Protocol turned the chamber into a lab. A fresh chain of custody form lay on the folding table like a modest altar. Timecode clocks blinked in triplicate. Felix ran a line check. Primary omnidirectional mic dead center, 2 cardioids at 45-degree offsets, a boundary mic taped flat to the deck in case the voice liked to travel through the floor. An accelerometer secured to a ceiling rib would tell them if the concrete itself carried the sound. Loya placed sterile placards beside each earlier marking and shot new baselines. The crescents, the central disk, the wall of dates, the bruise along the apex. Naomi photographed the room empty, then again with each of them standing exactly where their logs said they stood. It was, she thought dryly, the first courtroom she'd ever been in where the seating chart mattered more than the judge. At 23:42, the generator went off. The battery lantern stayed. For soft pools aimed down, never up, to keep the vault's shadow honest. Temperature, pressure, and humidity ticked into their graphs. The tunnel's low note prodded the edges of them like a territorial dog. 18.9 hertz rose, fell, rose, found its groove. Naomi stood with her back to the east wall and her boots outside the polished ring by an inch, hands out of her pockets, spine long. She wasn't going to let the geometry dress her. "Rolling," Felix said. Ruiz echoed it. Halvorsen added the time. 23 hours, 59 minutes, and 52 seconds. 8 seconds is an eternity, Naomi thought, long enough to change your mind twice. The midnight felt less like a time and more like an angle. On the first second after, the pressure in the chamber liquefied. Felix's thermal display flared as cooler sheets poured off the apex again. But where the plumes in late afternoon had puddled like curious animals, now they cohered with purpose, twisting into collars that hung at exactly head height above each crescent. The collars wobbled, steadied. Dust lifted from the arcs in whispering threads and knit into those floating hoops with a tenderness that scraped Naomi raw. "All rise," the room said. It didn't sound electronic. It didn't sound alive. It sounded like a sentence a place could remember. The way a town remembers a song played at a feast you weren't invited to. The accelerometer woke and scribbled an excited paragraph. The boundary mic picked up a faint lead, a shiver through the concrete that preceded the audible phrase by a hair. Felix's formant tracker drew little islands of vowel shapes on his screen like a map to a country he would never visit. He shot Naomi a look, equal parts triumph and fright, and then went back to being the sort of man who catches butterflies with nets made of math. "People versus Liam Calder," the voice continued, and Naomi this time did not tense. Some corner of herself had already made a neat box for those words. "Charge, homicide by foregone omission." Naomi answered as if she were addressing a clerk. "State investigator present. No public gallery. Proceed to evidence." Under her boots, the central disc twitched. The dust drew itself as if magnetized by an old obligation. Lines mapped galleries G4 to G7 with draftsman's grace. Thin arrows marked airflows. Hash marks annotated duct diameters. The maintenance hatch that wasn't on the official plan appeared again at the junction, its outline pricked by a darker clumping of iron-rich grit. Letters wrote themselves without flourish, as if a hand unwilling to be seen still insisted on legibility. "Independent timecode confirms real-time inscription," Felix murmured, half to his recorder, half to his own future. "No hand, no projector, no laser scatter. If it's a hoax, it's one with limbs I can't find." Naomi pinched bridge of nose pressure away and forced her thoughts into their lanes. "Dates," she said, not as a request but as the next link in a chain she wanted to build from command instead of supplication. Numbers stroked into being at the maintenance hatch. September 27th and September 28th, followed by shift times, 9 to 1700 hours and 17 to 1 o'clock. Next came names, a list in 2 columns, each letter filling like ink soaking through paper. She recognized 3. Men who'd called her office before about the bypass rumor, their courage dying at the edge of the whistle. She recognized 2 more by bloodline. Surnames matched to initials carved on the date's wall. Men whose fathers had earned tally marks in a ledger the tunnel kept as if it were a clerk who held grudges longer than people did. Loya worked like a surgeon, lens close, documenting each new stroke as if light could hold dust still. Ruiz called out the names into a separate recorder with the clean diction of an announcer who does not wish to contaminate the tape. Halvorsen stood in the mouth of the chamber with his hand on his weapon, ridiculous and human and perfect, because a man with a gun cannot stop wind from pretending to speak. But the posture says someone is willing to defend the living. Naomi pointed at the airflow arrows. "Show me the choke." The X leapt redder under her lamp, as if the iron there remembered blood. A new mark added itself upstream, 2 circles around a small square with a diagonal slash. Felix tilted his head, listening to a song only he could hear. "That's a shunt gate," he said. "Manual override plate. If you lock it there and the main fan load spikes, you get a pressure gradient that could stack methane until a spark writes a sermon." Naomi finished. She took stills, wide then tight. She pictured Morgan's tidy teeth saying we're guided by science. Pictured Eddie Voss with a wrench and a conscience that had learned to take cash over oxygen. The room gathered itself. The collars of Cool cinched down until Naomi could have sworn she saw them touch a phantom temple, graze a cheek, hesitate at lips. Her skin wanted to crawl away from her bones. The hand-on sternum pressure grew. 2 slow taps of rock on rock landed, measured as a heartbeat in a creature made of architecture. "Verdict," the voice said, and the boundary mic vibrated slightly against the deck before the word, as if the floor had learned to speak also. "Guilty." Sentence. 13 lives for 1 signature. Naomi could have delivered a speech then, about due process, about how pronouncing guilt does nothing but crown a crown, about how names are heavy and crowds are dumb, and that she had watched towns build gallows out of rumor and physics out of hunger. Instead she said, very quietly and perhaps mostly to herself, "Not this time." The pressure loosened, like a fist unclenching underwater. The collars drifted up, thinned, parted. Dust settled reluctantly, reluctant as any audience leaving after a magic trick they half understand and wholly want to believe. The thermal camera lost its drama and returned the room to a series of boring gradients. A minute passed measured by machines. Store this, Naomi ordered her own mind. Store the feeling as much as the data. Terror is a lousy witness. It writes too fast and too certain. Lights up, she said. Battery lanterns brightened. Felix's hands shook once, then stilled. Loya capped her last vial. Detective, Ruiz said softly. He was looking at the deck near the mouth, where earlier their boot tracks had left ordinary scuffs and nothing more. You'll want to see this. The floor had learned a new word. A phrase, in fact, not drawn in the same tidy cartography as the mind map, but stenciled like the Lex Siccus at the portal, except there had been no stencil here, no can, no hand. Letters sat 3 inches tall in heavy block. The iron in the dust made them glint darkly in the lantern light, as if a shadow could hold a shine. Tomorrow is on the docket. Naomi knelt. The strokes weren't paint. They were pressure, dust packed denser. Each letter's edge so crisp she could have shaved with it. She ran a gloved fingertip along the T and felt nothing but the lie of texture over concrete. She looked up at Felix. Pressure pattern? She asked. He shook his head, eyes wide in a way that had nothing to do with wonder. If it is, I don't have a model. The boundary mic didn't pop. The accelerometer shows a hiccup, but not a stroke. Detective, I think the room. Set type. Loya lifted her camera. If anybody asks me what faith is, she muttered. It's keeping my hands steady while I shoot this. Naomi stood and took her stills anyway, bracketing exposures as if photographs could arrest grammar. She pictured tomorrow at 10 in a boardroom, paper like sunlight on a table, Morgan sliding a pen as if it were a kindness. She pictured the maintenance hatch that didn't exist on the plan and a manual plate set wrong, while someone told a joke that killed 13 men they'd have to bury in pieces. She called the duty judge and filed an emergency application for a temporary restraining order to halt any ventilation modification at Red Mesa Lithium pending inspection. She called the state mine inspector and told him to meet her at dawn with seals and locks and an appetite for conflict. She called Aaron Calder and left a message meant for Liam, as much as for her. Don't sign. Not at 10. Not ever without the fans singing right. The desert can make noise. I can make law. When she hung up, the tunnel was still. It sounded like itself again. A long throat dreaming of rain. Naomi let her shoulders find their ordinary height. Outside, somewhere beyond the berm, a coyote sang the old song about hunger and distance. It grounded her better than any machine. Bag the time cards and pull the memory cards, she said. We're going to have to go to war with a press release and a shredder. Felix packed his mics with the tenderness of a man putting instruments back in their cases after the orchestra had tried to play God. Detective, he said, hesitant. There's another thing. What thing? When the voice spoke on the second guilty, the infrasound shifted phase. It's nothing I can parse yet, but it changed when it told us the number. Maybe physics doesn't like sentences, Naomi said. Maybe it prefers questions. She looked once more at the block letters on the floor. Tomorrow is on the docket. It was taunt and warning and invitation, all stenciled in dust that should have smeared under a breath and hadn't. Then we'll file a motion to continue, she said, and we'll win. She stepped out into the night that smelled faintly of creosote and electricity. The stars were honest, too many to count, which is how they tell you they can't be counted. Out on US 95, a semi rolled by, its diesel cough a mechanized lullaby. Naomi tasted grit and decided she liked it better than fear. Dawn would bring paperwork and pushback and maybe handcuffs. Midnight had given her math, a map, and a sentence to defy. She could work with that. The county archive lived in an old schoolhouse whose windows had been painted shut long enough to forget how to open. The clerk at the desk wore a sweater with a moth hole and a badge that said Marge but introduced herself as Margaret like a woman insisting on vowels. Naomi signed the visitor log and slid over her request list. Civil defense maps from the test range era, flood control records for the tunnel complex, any inquest files tying Death's Underground to storms, and Union material from the early 60s with names around a strike she'd only half heard in Ruiz's printout. "You want the mouth," Margaret said, peering at the paper over half-moon glasses. "I know you all call it a tunnel, but we call it a mouth because it swallows and it talks." "I'll take the years it swallowed," Naomi said, "and anything that taught it to talk." Margaret's mouth went prim in a way Naomi liked. Talking is a bad habit learned from people. She vanished between stacks and returned with 3 gray Hollinger boxes, a rolled tube that threatened to unfurl itself into the past, and a flat archive envelope with "Do Not Bend" printed on it like a dare. They spread the maps on a table that had 2 old knife marks and a permanent coffee ring shaped like an eclipse. The flood control diagram was neat Corps of Engineers drafting, channels like intestines, drop shafts like valves, the Cold War's fastidiousness married to Nevada's impatience. A red pencil, probably added by a county engineer with a headache, circled a section that matched the chamber Naomi now knew too well. "Here," Margaret said, tapping the bulb section. Originally poured as a surge chamber, to hold runoff and meter it under the highway when the hills dump their temper. In 61, they added a spur. She unrolled the tube halfway and anchored the corners with a stapler and a rock she called a paperweight. Civil defense shelter. Not official. A place to keep bodies with clearances who weren't supposed to be outside when things went wrong. "Detonations," Naomi said. "Fallout drills. Also storms," Margaret said. "We get both kinds of apocalypse." She shuffled a folder free. "And here, unreported deaths, if you please." The file smelled like wet cardboard and pencil lead. Inside, a typed memo from 1962, onion skin thin, stamped received and then forgotten. 2 names, no firsts, just last and rank, assigned to range maintenance. Lost during a flash event, water behavior nonlinear. Recovered downstream in a culvert. A marginal note. Notify family under separate cover. Another memo and signed argued for gates that were never installed. No coroner's inquest. No newspaper item. The Cold War had many paper rooms for forgetting. "People got paid to let things be forgotten," Margaret said, not unkindly. "Sometimes a town builds its own forgetting. It gets heavy if you don't air it." Naomi leafed to the Union material. The mimeograph blue had kept its perfume. "Don't sign what buries you," a flyer declared over a blocky fist. The strike leader's name appeared again and again in the minutes, a man who wrote like he talked and talked like he was about to run out of time. Elias Crane. He had argued against a ventilation shortcut proposed by a consultant from Denver whose name never made the minutes, had promised to chain himself to a fan if he had to, had vanished before he had to prove it. A last note, scrawled at the bottom of a page with a grease pencil that had bled across fabric. E.L.C. Last seen entering flood tunnel to avoid provocation. The meeting adjourned without a vote. "You were around then?" Naomi asked, glancing at Margaret's hands. Age written in veins and papery skin, competent. "Born later," Margaret said. "But my mother worked at the switchboard when sirens meant things." She said Elias was the kind who made the room hotter and the air better. Those men didn't like being cooled. She shut the Hollinger box like a door on ghosts. "You want Irene. She'll tell you what we call the thing you're circling." "Irene Blackbird? She sits mornings at the trading post, afternoons under the cottonwood by the clinic. Today's Tuesday. The clinic has shade." Margaret's mouth turned prim again. "If you tell her you need to take dust out of a place, she'll ask what you plan to put back." Naomi thanked her, made high-resolution phone captures of what couldn't leave the room, and drove the 2 miles to the clinic, where a cottonwood tried its best to remember a river. Irene Blackbird sat on a plastic chair with the kind of dignity that made the chair look like furniture. Her braid was silver and black and precise. She watched Naomi approach the way the desert watches. Like nothing could surprise it, only confirm. "Ms. Blackbird," Naomi said, offering herself without badge first. "I'm Naomi. You brought the mouth with you," Irene said. "I can hear it in your teeth." "The mouth is loud," Naomi admitted. "Louder when people believe it." Irene nodded. "Places listen to the loudest thing. If the loudest thing is fear, they remember fear. If the loudest thing is rage, they keep score. The hills out there learned to count when we kept breath from men down below. Debt likes to collect interest. Debt, Naomi repeated, liking the way the word took weight without theatrics. Interest. Irene's eyes went somewhere behind Naomi, to a time with harder boots. We kept people under the ground to keep other people in the air. That is a ledger. Wind writes it. The mouth is a clerk with a long pencil. Sometimes clerks get uppity and pronounce sentence. That is when you remind them the judge is supposed to breathe. I'm trying, Naomi said. But someone's feeding the clerk. Irene smiled, not unkind. People like to help their myths. It makes them feel big. It makes them feel like they can play both sides and collect a tithe from belief. Naomi told her, in a clean version, about the Lex Sica stencil, the iron dust arcs that redrew themselves, the names and the X at the maintenance hatch. The phrase tomorrow is on the docket printed in a typeface of pressure. Irene listened without flinching. When Naomi said the word 13, Irene's mouth tightened slightly, an accountant hearing a number that matches a sum she already had. The court, Irene said, tasting the word like a spice. We didn't call it that. We called it the place where the wind counts breath. She reached into a cloth bag and brought out a small braid of sage, tied neat with red thread. You will go back there when the work is done. You will tell it what was paid. That matters. She tucked the braid into Naomi's palm with a firmness that made refusal silly. And you will stop people from making the dead work overtime. You think it's an egregore, Naomi said, tasting the fancy word to see if the shape fit here. A thought form built by a town that likes its stories too much. Irene chuckled. You can call it a church if you prefer. Call it a place. Places are greedy if you let them be. Feed it with records and repairs and it will starve of drama. Feed it with live streams and lies and it will eat names. A door opened behind them. A nurse stepped out into the shade, glanced at Irene the way you glance at a stone you've learned to respect and forgot could move. Naomi thanked Irene and turned to go. Irene's voice stopped her lightly. Don't stand outside it and yell at shadows, she said. Stand in the middle and speak to the room. Rooms hear better than shadows. Already tried, Naomi said. It didn't throw me out. It knows your job, Irene said, satisfied. Do it. By the time Naomi hit the motel, the air had learned to be solid. The neon vacancy sign blinked with the end-of-season tiredness particular to places where the clientele always planned to leave. Naomi showered tunnel dust off her skin until her shoulders stopped insisting they carried concrete. She spread the day's papered past across the bed, made a nest of the present on the desk, and opened her laptop to build the demand that would keep men from dying before rumor could be put back in its pen. Subject: Emergency subpoena Dutses Tecum, Red Mesa Lithium. She wanted internal audits for the last quarter, emails and memos regarding ventilation bypass proposals. Any communications by or to Morgan Pike regarding detector calibration. Contractor lists, firmware access logs, a detailed map of Gallery 4 to 7 including any maintenance hatches not on public record. She CC'd the state mine inspector, the AG's duty counsel, and the county judge who'd signed lesser things for her without complaint. She attached Felix's preliminary acoustic summary, not the parts that made reporters feel smart, just the parts that made judges hesitate to call something a prank without ordering locks installed. Her phone chimed with a text. Aaron, Owen home. No tunnel. He says his coach heard the ham stream and canceled practice tomorrow. Also, this was taped to our door when I got back from the store. A photo arrived. An envelope slid under the mat, the paper as anonymous as a hospital wall. Inside, a single sheet typed on a machine that didn't care about fonts. Calder signs Friday 10 o'clock. Show up or dig graves. Naomi looked at the clock. Wednesday, 21:12. Friday at 10 would never arrive as a day so much as a convergence, a geometry where paper met air. She texted back, do not touch anything taped to your door without gloves. I'm sending a deputy. She forwarded the image to Halvorsen with an address and the words, bag it like a bomb and dust the neighborhood cameras. She put the Irene braid of sage on the motel desk and felt foolish immediately and then less so, the way you do when you place your grandmother's ring in a pocket before a complicated day. She worked another hour, drafted a restraining order request with case law citations that would make Morgan's counsel reach for decoff, wrote a memo to the sheriff recommending noise-cancel towers and a strictly enforced no-stand zone for any new hearing, and sent Ruiz to pull 2011 inquest testimony. 2 men lost to air that failed the way paper justifies and physics detests. Sleep came like a fugitive, alert to every engine in the parking lot, every compressor cough. She woke twice with words in her mouth she couldn't translate, the gentlest of which was ledger. Near dawn, she dreamed a neat room with 12 chairs that refused to touch the floor. At first light, she drove back to the mouth because leaving a room with a sentence on its floor is like leaving a stove on. Your mind returns to it even when your car won't. The sheriff's tape fluttered. A deputy she didn't know from Tonopah saluted with a thermos. Inside, the tunnel was quiet in the way a belly is quiet before it remembers it's hungry. The block letters remained. Tomorrow is on the docket, crisp as guilt. The central disk still bore its cartography. The crescents looked stupid again, which is how traps look when they sleep. "Detective," Felix said from behind her, his hair doing its own weather. I sat up reading phase plots. The voice is riding the room. Sure, but there's modulation I can't hang on a wind. If someone tried to fake this with hidden speakers, they're smarter than me and I am professionally offended. Keep being offended, Naomi said. Offended men file better reports. Loya waved from the far wall where dates had been scratched by hands with more time than ink. This got longer, she said, pointing. A fresh line, shallow and almost shy, had sprouted beneath 2006. 1962 Elias C. Naomi stared. That wasn't their last night. No, Loya said. But it is now. Places cure it, Felix murmured. Or clerks update ledgers when presented with a claim. Naomi took the picture. Then she took the same picture again because sometimes you take 2 when your hands want assurances your mind can't give. She brushed a knuckle against the new cut. Grit whispered onto her glove. Fresh, shallow, too neat for flood chew. She stepped back into the center, boots on the edge of the polished disc, and spoke to the room in the calm voice you use when presenting an exhibit that will hurt. Elias Crane, she said. Det noted. Nothing moved. Good. She didn't need the room to answer. She needed it to listen. Outside, the day went paler. The judge signed her temporary restraining order by fax with a handwritten note that looked like a sigh. Inspect first. No bypass. Morgan's counsel replied with press release nonsense about hoaxes and cooperation and robust safety culture. Eddie Voss's name came back on the contractor list with a cell number and a note. Access to detector firmware, temporary. Naomi forwarded it to Ruiz with the word now. She drove to the mine with a folded court order in her pocket and a clerk's certainty stiffening her spine. On the way out of town, a gust shoved Grit against her windshield like a hand trying to erase a word. Failed. The letters stayed on the glass until the wipers smeared them away. By the time she hit the gate, the guard's radio had already heard the rumor of law. She watched him watch her badge and then her face and then the paper she laid on his clipboard. He pressed the intercom. Somewhere inside, a voice like Morgan's practiced smile was explaining how cooperation worked. Tell her we're here to pay a debt, Naomi said, and enjoyed briefly how the phrase felt when you drove it like a nail. Red Mesa Lithium pretended not to have a smell. The wind corrected it. Chemical sweet over hot rock, a metallic tang that made Naomi's molars ache. The guard at the main gate lifted the plastic window of his booth like a man opening a confession booth the wrong way around. Naomi placed the court order under the plexi. Behind her, the state mine inspector, a square-shouldered woman named Del Ankeny, stacked 2 equipment cases on a dolly with the patient affection of a medic preparing to set a bone. Temporary restraining order, Naomi said. No ventilation changes, no bypass operation, no firmware alterations to gas detection or fan control, pending inspection. The guard read the first line and the judge's signature like a man reading his own temperature. He pressed the intercom. Naomi watched the security camera above the gate pivot, stutter, find her. She lifted her badge as if to feed it. 3 minutes later, a golf cart appeared. driven by a man in a collared shirt the exact color of compromise. He introduced himself as Phil from compliance and skidded through the standard vocabulary: cooperation, safety culture, robust protocols, like a kid on gravel. When Naomi asked for the Gallery 4 map including maintenance hatches, he produced a laminated print with a white rectangle where the hatch belonged. When Dell asked for the detector calibration logs, he found a file folder and then, sheepishly, a second one. "We'll be sealing shunts and tagging overrides," Dell said. "Escort us to the fans." They took the service road past pale tailings and the scarred slope where the conveyor climbed like a long, exhausted animal. The fan house sat on poured pad, windowless, promising noise. Inside, 3 industrial blowers moved air as if it owed them money. The scrawl of permanent marker above a control box read, "Don't die here." Someone's sense of humor, someone's reminder. Dell's team, 2 techs who wore their hard hats like crowns they'd earned, pulled panels and clipped on lockout tags with the gravity of surgeons placing clamps on arteries. Naomi took photos of every tag, every seal. At the control rack, Dell frowned. "Detector 4 shows a firmware flash last week," she said, tapping the screen. "Not manufacturer. Side-loaded. Calibration." Phil tried. "Calibration doesn't flash firmware," Dell said. "Calibration calibrates." Naomi made a note. Eddie Voss. The name sat on the page with a small, unlovely gravity. In admin, the air conditioning overachieved at making everything feel unimportant. Naomi sat in a glass-walled room decorated with canvases of abstract mineral veining that tried to make geology look like finance. She set the subpoena packet on the table. Morgan Pike arrived with a legal pad and a smile arranged to show her molars but not her throat. "Detective Creed," Morgan said, as if they were old colleagues, as if Naomi had once spilled Chardonnay on her at a conference and they had both laughed. "And you must be Ms. Ankeny. We love the state. The state keeps us honest." "The state keeps people breathing," Dell said. "Which keeps us honest," Morgan said, without missing a beat. She took the order, skimmed, set it down with care. "I do hope you understand that rumors about tunnels and supernatural jurisprudence, while entertaining, can damage investor confidence." "What damages confidence is burying men," Naomi said. "We're here to collect documents and to install enough locks that paper can't outvote air." Morgan's smile conceded a point in a game she insisted she was winning. "We'll, of course, preserve everything. Our audits are exemplary. Our culture robust." "Emails," Naomi said. "All communications about ventilation bypass, detector calibration, firmware changes. All correspondence between your office and contractors working on gas detection in the last quarter." Morgan folded her hands. "Our counsel will facilitate." "Your counsel is CC'd," Naomi said. "You'll facilitate." The printer in the corner spat paper like a cat coughing up hair. The first stack was internal audits where every concern was resolved on the next page by a sentence that sounded like a handshake. The second stack was email chains that read like people daring each other to say the quiet part aloud. Naomi took the top one and found Morgan's voice rendered into type. Perky, plausible, weaponized. Short, controlled bypass during heat spikes. Legal comfortable. Will offset with booster fans. Sign off by safety by Friday 10 o'clock keeps us on track. Further down, Liam's reply. Measured, careful, indexing liability even as he tried to avoid it. Concerned about methane pockets in G4 junction. Detectors have been faulting. Won't sign without engineer of record. Morgan again, the smile sharp in parentheses. Understand your caution. Pension conversations are above my pay grade, but we'd hate to see a valued colleague miss his targets. Let's circle back off record. Naomi printed 2 copies, highlighted, bagged. Morgan watched like a woman at a magic show who is also writing the patent. "Who's Eddie Voss?" Naomi asked. "A contractor," Morgan said. "Very skilled. Troubleshoots anything with wires. Your emails show him with temporary firmware access to detector arrays," Naomi said. "Who authorized?" Morgan's smile did not change. "Compliance." Phil coughed from the doorway. "That might have been me." "Might," Dell said, not looking up from the logs she was leafing. "Or was." "Was," Phil said, very small. Naomi didn't press him. People who'd been given orders ratting on people who gave them was her favorite kind of physics. She checked her phone. A text from Ruiz. Got Voss in the system. Address in Amargosa. Also, hang on. A second text. Pulling teen footage from tunnel. You're gonna love this. She stepped out of the glass box and into the hall to take Ruiz's call. He sounded like a man who had been given the gift of confirmation and wanted to return it with a bow. Kid named Mateo, friend of Owen's, has a channel where he posts skate clips. He keeps the location vague. Monday night, he shot a dare run along the lip at the mouth. Watch the far end of the clip. A link arrived. Naomi tapped. The video showed a teenager with bravery borrowed from someone else's camera work, dropping into a concrete curve, wheels whispering. A whoop cut short when the wind shoved him faster than he expected. In the far background, where the service track met the maintenance lot, headlights idled without a sound. The timestamp tucked itself neatly into the corner. Naomi froze the frame, zoomed. The grille was distinctive even in grain, the corporate fleet's matte gray pickup. The license plate snapped into clarity on the third try. Monday, Ruiz said. 1:23 a.m. truck registered to Red Mesa PR. Garage key card shows out at 0:41. Back in at 2:10. Guess who checked it out? Ms. Pike's office, Naomi said. Of course. What did they need at the tunnel at 1 in the morning? Brand management, Ruiz said dryly. Or stencil practice. Pull the lot cams, Naomi said, and scrub for any footage inside the tunnel from that hour. Teens love tripods. Bag the original on Mateo's phone. Don't just take the upload. She went back into the glass room. Morgan had arranged her legal pad to a perfect right angle with the table's edge. The printer had fallen quiet, as if embarrassed. You went to the tunnel at 1 a.m. Monday, Naomi said, laying the still frame down between them. With a company truck. Morgan glanced at the picture and then at Naomi. You're asking me if I took a drive on a public road? I'm asking why a PR executive would visit a flood control tunnel at 1 in the morning while teenagers were filming and a phrase in Latin appeared on the concrete. Morgan's smile flattened until it looked like a blade seen head-on. Because the internet exists. Because I check on things before they become stories. Because some people are trying to harm a business that feeds this county. Some people are trying to keep it from swallowing names, Naomi said. We'll talk to Mr. Voss. We'll talk to your lawyer. And then we'll talk to a judge about seals that don't unlock when you make a phone call. Morgan stood. Detective Creed, you enjoy this too much. I enjoy everyone going home, Naomi said. Even you. Back in the Tahoe, the truck's dash collected heat like confession. Naomi dialed Voss. He didn't pick up. She texted, State investigation. Call me before I knock. She left the mine with Dell setting seals like red jewelry on everything that could turn air into politics. Her phone buzzed with a message from Aaron. Morgan called Liam. Wants a meeting Friday at 10 o'clock to align expectations. He's shaking. Naomi pulled into the Calder's driveway and saw the shaking before she saw Liam. He stood on the porch with his hands in his pockets like he'd hidden them from himself. Erin had her jaw set in the way of a woman who has decided which thing can break and which can't. You look like you've been told a storm will skip you if you sign a map, Naomi said gently. Liam sat. The porch creaked, grateful for the truth of weight. I keep thinking if I sign, nothing happens. And if I don't, the company blacklists me and Owen has to pick a cheaper college, and every day after that is me telling myself I saved lives when really I just made my family smaller. He glanced up, shame trying on his face and finding it fit too easily. I'm not a killer. Good, Naomi said. That makes this part simple. You don't sign the thing that kills. You help me prove why. You send me every email that proves you were pressured. You tell your crews you refused because air is not paperwork. When Morgan calls, you put it on speaker. You let me stand in the room. Erin slid a glass of water onto the railing like an offering to gravity. He doesn't sign, she said. We already chose. He just needs his body to catch up. Liam's phone rang. Morgan's name bloomed in capital letters. He stared at it as if it were a snake that knew his name. He swallowed and answered, thumb shaking, speaker on. Liam, Morgan said brightly, anemically, we should get ahead of tomorrow's noise. I'll see you in the boardroom at 10 for a quick sign-off. Then you can take your wife to lunch. We'll all feel better. I'm not signing, Liam said. The words came out like a man putting his hand on a live wire on purpose. Not until the inspector clears the fans. Not ever if the math is bad. Pause. The smile reassembled, brittle. Let's not grandstand. People are listening. They should, Liam said, and ended the call with a thumb that finally remembered what hands are for. Naomi exhaled. Not relief, relief is for endings, but something like a ledger line balancing for a second. She stood. There's one more thing. Stay away from the mouth tonight. Everyone stays away. Sheriff's orders. Aaron's expression said good luck with everyone. Naomi's phone confirmed it. The Parumpam had posted again, the headline swallowing its own tongue. Hearing at dusk. Sentencing rehearsal. Comments bloomed like algae. Bring chairs. Bring signs. Make it answer. Naomi called Halvorsen. Full closure at the service road. Noise cancel towers up. No stand zones chalked and enforced. Confiscate live stream rigs. If anyone says all rise, you say all quiet. She drove toward the berm as the sky thought about evening. Dust plumed behind the Tahoe, soft and biblical. The tunnel would try to seat itself. People would try to help. The phrase lived in her mouth like a thorn. The paper that kills, she thought, and pressed the accelerator, and told herself she was racing a pen. They tried to make dusk boring. That was the plan. Kill spectacle with procedure, drown rumor with signage and the soothing tyranny of cones. Sheriff's units threw a gate across the service road. A portable message board blinked in amber. Area closed, flood risk, NO entry. Deputies in wide-brim hats did the work of shepherds with better radios. A flatbed rolled up with 2 tripod towers that looked like stage lights but were really the opposite. Phase-canceling arrays Dell had borrowed from a highway project, meant to neuter jackhammer hell. Tex bolted them down at the tunnel mouth, sighted them to throw a quiet shaped like a blade into the throat of concrete. Think it'll work? Halvorsen asked. Think it'll try, Naomi said. Felix fussed with a laptop tray that hung from his neck like a bad bib. He'd retuned the arrays to hit the tunnel's favorite note with an equal and opposite wave, anti-song against song. We can't stop the wind from playing the room, he said, but we can make the room less of an instrument. Break up the seating, too, Naomi said. No stand zones here, here, here. She walked the chamber, chalking X marks through 8 of the 12 crescents and a bright circle with a slash through the polished disc in the center. This is not a ring. This is a construction site. If anyone stands in a marked crescent, they get moved or cited. Loya followed, taping paper placards to the deck and walls, sterile as hospital signs. Do not enter. Evidence area. NO photography. She shot fresh baselines. Empty room, marked geometry, anti-noise towers humming faintly at the mouth. Phones. Naomi told the deputies. Anyone with a live stream rig loses it for the evening. Cut their feeds and log their names. We can give them back a First Amendment after there isn't a body count. The sound of disappointment approached in trucks and on foot. Townspeople, some curious, some angry, some hungry for a feeling to show up and tell them what to be. They met the cones. The cones held. A group of teenagers in thrifted black tried to look like they'd invented the word contempt. A woman in a red mesa polo folded her arms in solidarity with the profit motive. A retired man with a ham radio on his belt looked like he'd come to baptize something. Deputies turned them all with the same calm. Flood risk, official investigation, come back never. At 1942, Naomi walked into the tunnel with her jaw unclenched and her spine long. The temperature cut down again. 5 degrees, maybe a hair more. As if the room were already inhaling, getting ready to speak. The anti-noise arrays fed a clean, invisible blade of silence into the throat. It wasn't silence so much as subtraction. The kind of quiet you feel as pressure in the wrong parts of your face. Test, Felix said and snapped his fingers. The echo died small. Good. Naomi set the ritual in motion. Time code rolling. Ruiz called the time. Loya photographed the deck, crescent excess bright. The central circle slashed like a no-smoking sign. Halvorsen stood at the eastern pinch with 2 deputies, palms out. Nobody passed this point, including them. The room waited with the patience of concrete. The wind shifted above the berm. The note came in lower than before, like a dog growling under a porch. Felix frowned at his plots and nudged a slider. The towers answered with a tone they couldn't hear, and the room sulked. The pressure sat on Naomi's sternum anyway. The hairs along her forearms practiced standing and decided not to. "Hold the pattern," Felix muttered, half to the laptop, half to the tunnel. "Don't give me arts and crafts. Give me math." 1959 arrived without ceremony. No collars yet. No skitter of rock. Naomi almost let herself believe that bureaucracy could starve folklore. Then the plumes began to pour. They came off the apex like wine from a decanter. Smooth, thick, contemptuous of the lines Naomi had chalked. The collars tried to form and shivered. The anti-noise blade sliced through the ring height and detuned it an inch lower. Collars fluttered out of phase and then reknit. The dust along the crescents lifted like a cat arching to a hand and met the excess Naomi had scrawled across them. It hesitated. "Don't take the seat," Naomi said aloud. The dust did what crowds do when told not to. It tried anyway. It swirled around the chalked X and looked petulant, pouting grains refusing to settle into the old groove. On 3 crescents the collar held. On the 4th it broke. On the 5th it tried to reform, and the anti-noise pulsed again, and it thinned, translucent as a lie caught on tape. "All rise," the room said. The anti-noise arrays phasing against the tunnel's voice made the phrase sound as if 2 judges had spoken at once. One indignant, one hoarse. The boundary mic jiggled angrily against the tape. The accelerometer twitched. On the deck, Naomi felt an almost imperceptible tick through her boots. The room's version of tapping a pen on a desk it owned. "Proceed to evidence," Naomi said, steady. "No gallery is present." The dust scratched at the central disc and stalled on the circle slash she'd drawn. It tried to write through it, and the slash's packed grains resisted. Tiny berm against tiny flood. The lines came thin, erratic. The map struggled into being like a memory under sedation. Galleries G4, G7, airflow arrows jittering. The X at the maintenance hatch appearing in fits, dimmer than before. A streak veered off and misspelled a corridor by 6 inches. The room corrected itself impatiently, erasing and redrawing with a tremor. "That's you," Felix breathed, jabbing a key. "The towers are forcing the plumes off node. Can't seat the jury and it can't write clean. We're making belief stumble." The room disliked stumbling. The collars thickened over the crescents that had held. On the nearest, the cool ring cinched into a hard circle that made Naomi's eyes insist there was a head where there wasn't. The pressure in the chamber kicked a notch hotter. A pebble that had done no wrong to anyone shot from the east pinch and skittered to Naomi's feet. It bounced, chimed once, and lay accusing. "Contempt of court," the voice said. It was thinner than before, stretched across a frequency net Felix kept twisting. The word court came out more like core and coat, stripped of some of its courtroom dignity and forced to wear desert clothes. Dust hissed against concrete like muted applause that didn't have enough hands. A deputy's radio cracked at the mouth. Naomi held up one finger without looking. Not now. If the room wanted a fight about protocol, she would give it one on the record. "Record," she said to Ruiz. "Rolling," he said. Naomi stepped across the slash through the central ring and into the circle where fear liked to turn on itself. Her boot soles slid a fraction before finding purchase. The cool here licked her shins, climbed her ribs as if to measure her. She planted her feet anyway. If geometry wanted a center, she would be the wrong one. "On the record," she said, and her voice sounded pleasingly ordinary. "State Investigator Naomi Creed, Nevada Division of Investigations. You've produced allegations. You've produced a map, dates, shift times, names, a choke. You have not produced a body. You will not. No verdict binds the living. Prove evidence." The room did what rooms do when addressed by their right name. It listened. The anti-noise arrays pushed and the infrasound sulked and a crooked equilibrium arrived. The collars over the crescents rippled, thinned, attempted to cinch again and failed. The map on the floor held like a half-developed photograph. The X at the maintenance hatch glowed, so faint Naomi could have pretended not to see, and then dimmed, as if sulking. Felix made a sound like someone exhaling a math problem. "Phase lock," he said. "We've pinned it. The room wants to be a church and you made it a city council meeting." "Keep it there," Naomi said. "Make the choir bored." The tunnel tried one last flex. The tap of rock on rock came hard, impatient. The boundary mic jolted and slid an inch, tape snapping with a little cry. Dust lifted in a temper and swirled, seeking edges, seeking the familiar crescent of ascent. The anti-noise scissored back and forth like a blade trimming a hedge that kept growing wrong. The collars had nothing left to hang on. They collapsed. Not dramatically, not like a stunt. More like a crowd deciding the meeting was over and filing out, muttering, leaving coffee cups and a smell of wool. The cool fell away from Naomi's legs. The pressure eased. The infrasound, sulking, settled into a lower hum that belonged to concrete and wind and had no Latin in it. For a beat, the tunnel was only a tunnel, a conduit with a memory issue. Naomi waited for the phantom judge to reassert itself. Didn't. The towers kept their black magic hush going, and the room's favorite note couldn't climb back up to righteous. Outside, a murmur that had been waiting beyond the cones swelled and died. Disappointment from 100 throats that had wanted a miracle to tell them what to do. Deputies held the line. A coyote took the opportunity to remind the valley who sang better. Loya crouched and put a scale card beside the half-written map. "Document the mess," she said, voice almost cheerful with relief. "Hoaxes hate messy. So do clerks." Naomi stepped out of the circle. A faint scuff of her boot erased one of the bad lines the dust had tried to write and failed to. She let it. Evidence could keep its truest self without that little flourish. Felix rubbed his neck. Sweat had found a path along his spine in a room that was technically cool. "You realize," he said, "that whatever this is, physics, fraud, thought form, it wants witness posture. We starved it of that and it pouted." "Good," Naomi said. "Let it pout. We don't do theater tonight." She checked her watch. 2011. The better part of an hour before full dark. Enough time to turn this from an event into a memo. She radioed Halvorsen. "Clear the berm," she said. "Tell them the hearing recessed itself. If anyone asks who by, say, by a lack of interest, anyone tries to argue right to attend, hand them Dell's flood maps." Halvorsen answered with the constrained glee of a man allowed to be droll on duty. "Copy. The court finds the audience unnecessary." Naomi allowed herself a small smile no one got to see. She walked to the wall of dates. The new shallow line, 1962, Elias C. Held like a whisper a clerk had added when no one was watching. She touched her gloved knuckle to it the way one might touch a headstone. "Det noted," she thought. "Paid soon." Back at the table, she wrote the entry she wanted in the ledger, the only one a room like this should be allowed to keep. Incident. Attempted seating prevented by geometry inversion and active phase cancellation. Verbal output. Contempt of court. Evidence requested. Maps provided. Incomplete. No gallery present. Action. Proceed to mine inspection. Injunction served. Signature stopped. She signed with the little scratch her name always made at the end and felt, for a blink, like she had pronounced something that deserved to be called law. "Pack it," she said. "We're done here until it tries a new trick." As they stepped out into evening, the wind brought the smell of creosote and cheap barbecue from the roadblock where disappointed people were inventing new plans for their feelings. The stars were climbing into their positions. Somewhere east, a boardroom waited with pens arranged like knives. Somewhere west, a man whose name had been borrowed by a tunnel was sitting very still in his living room pretending to breathe normally. Naomi tucked Irene's braid of sage into her jacket pocket as if it were a warrant you didn't show until it mattered. "Next," she said to the night, not unkindly. The night, unbothered, said nothing back. Naomi stepped into the center once more and said, "Calm and clear for the body cam. No verdict binds the living. Prove evidence." The dust sagged and lay down like a tired thing. Then she headed for the mine. Dell met Naomi at the outer gate with a clipboard and a face that had decided to be done with someone else's emergencies. Overnight seals hung from the fan house like red earrings that meant no. A deputy sat with a thermos and the patient look of a man who'd learned to measure his shift in court signatures rather than sun. "Fans are locked and tagged," Dell said. "Any hands on them will leave fingerprints and charges." Detector 4's firmware image pulled. "There's code on there that doesn't belong to anyone with a warranty." "Voss," Naomi said. "Or a friend," Dell said. "There's a timestamp Monday night." Naomi glanced toward the administration block. Glass gleamed like a grin. "Then we'll ask the room to testify." They took the service corridor down into Gallery 4 with an escort whose keys jangled too brightly in the quiet. G4 was a long lung ribbed with bolts and braced with faith. The fans, off. Let the heat get confident. Wet rock smell climbed Naomi's throat. She wore a portable meter clipped to her vest, its little screen a private weather report. Dell's team, 2 techs named Bat and Lori who could read ductwork like Braille, worked ahead, opening panels, shining beams into returns that had learned to hoard dust, marking shunts with orange chalk. Here, here, here. Naomi stopped at a junction and set a print of the tunnel's dust-scribbled map on the ground. "Right here," she said, pointing to the X the room had drawn. "There should be a maintenance hatch that isn't on any official plan." "Which is why it'll be here," Bat said, and rapped the wall with a knuckle. Hollow. 3 bolts wore fresher scars than their neighbors. Lori drove them out with the care you give to old things you want to keep. The panel came away like a secret that had waited too long. Behind it, a cramped crawl with a manual plate, a square of steel with a diagonal handle, set halfway closed and locked in place with a shim someone had made from a hacksaw blade. Dell swore with professional restraint. "If the main fan spiked," she said, "this would have turned G4 into a bottle. Pressure gradient would have hammered methane into the low room over there." She tilted her head toward a gallery that bent with old geology. "All it would take is a spark, a switch, a boot nail, a cough from the machinery that doesn't know it's holy." Naomi photographed the hacksaw blade shim, the tool marks where someone had wedged it in, the fine metallic dust that kissed the floor under the plate. She bagged a fragment. "We'll see whose garage this blade came from." The portable meter cheeped once, soft, as if embarrassed. "Trace methane," Lori said, checking her own. "Low but present. In a sealed room, this would stack." "Like a sermon," Naomi said. They worked the corridor to the end, logging every plate and latch, tagging 2 more manual overrides set wrong, and a third that had been temporarily wired in place with baling wire and hope. Dell's hands stayed steady. Naomi trusted women who could keep fury in their fingers without letting it spill. Back topside, the sun turned the fan house into an oven waiting for the theory of heat. Naomi stood by the truck and called the mouth. Felix answered with the kind of careful you bring to a conversation with a wild animal after you've made it mad. "We're live," Naomi said. "Bring your kit and meet me at the tunnel." "Detective," Felix said. "Are we asking it questions or letting it take the stand?" "Both," Naomi said. "And we'll object when it tries to grandstand." By late afternoon, the tunnel had the same patient hush it had when a storm is deciding whether to happen to you. They set the table. Mics, time codes, placards, and, this time, Naomi's prints, laminated copies of the mine schematics and fresh photos of the maintenance hatch and hacksaw shim. She laid them in the central disk as if filing exhibits in a box. She added a lined legal pad and wrote at the top, "Exhibits." Felix raised an eyebrow. "You're baiting an egregore with stationery." "I'm informing a clerk," Naomi said. She stood in the ring, boots on the edge of polish, sage braid tucked into her jacket pocket like a phrase you use when you need it. The room's note crept in along her teeth, that low syllable the tunnel liked to hum. Her portable meter showed clean air. Her skin did not care. "All right," Naomi said to the apex seam. "You like procedure. You like names. You like saying people v." as if you've been deputized by gravity. Good. Present your exhibits. The infrasound rose a notch. Dust lifted, reluctant, as if recalling a previous humiliation. The collars tried to cinch and failed. Left ragged by the anti-noise towers Felix had tuned to irritate without erasing. The central disc twitched. A line pulled itself toward Naomi's laminated print and continued across it, as if the plastic had no privileges here. Arrows stretched into the air like tendons. Exhibit A, Naomi said, holding her phone high so bodycam could see. Galleries G4, G7 annotated for airflow. The dust obliged. It traced her photo with better penmanship than some engineers she'd met, adding arrows where she had none. It circled the maintenance hatch in a skirling loop and drew the little square with a diagonal slash with almost what? Personality. Then, like a witness cued by a nudge, it wrote a tidy legend beside it. Manual plate locked. Felix made a small noise that had the syllables of profanity and prayer. No projection, he said, eyes on his plots. No lasers. It's drawing on the laminate as if the plastic were dust. Detective, I am running out of naturalistic verbs. Exhibit B, Naomi said, setting the photo of the hacksaw shim in the maintenance crawl into the disk. Unauthorized immobilization of manual plate. The dust circled the shim as if putting a leash on it. A line extended from the circle to the wall of dates, paused, and then, as neatly as chalk on a school slate, wrote the numbers September 27th and September 28th. It added times. It added names. Naomi recognized 2 from the G4 roster. She recognized a third she wished she didn't. Eddie Voss. Exhibit C, Naomi said, quieter. Contractor access. The room hesitated. The infrasound pitched its complaint lower, a dog trying a new bark. Naomi stepped into the middle of the disk and set down Dell's firmware diff, the printout that showed manufacturer code on one side and an ugly graft of hand-rolled logic on the other. You like Latin, she said. You'll love logs. Here. She tapped the timestamp with her knuckle. Monday night. Detector 4 flashed with unauthorized code. Who touched it? The dust did something it hadn't done before. It curled upward off the deck as if snagged by a wind you couldn't feel anywhere else. It accumulated into a small standing thread and poked at the page like a kid who doesn't believe the glass is real. Then, with one curt motion, it underlined the time and scrawled, "No typeface now, just hurry, Voss." Record, Naomi said, even though everything already was. A smell came then that had nothing to do with dust. A sulfur edge, not strong enough to trigger her meter, strong enough to get in her head. Felix glanced at his handheld and flicked a look that said be sure. He lifted the intake of a portable sniffer toward the apex. His needle twitched like a dog's ear. Trace methane, he said, aligned with the choke point. Exhibit D, Naomi said, voice flat as she could make it. Gas present where your map says it will be. The room accepted the point with bureaucratic grace. It extended a chalk finger to Naomi's airflow arrows and added a new line there. One that bent around the choke and disappeared into a spur she didn't have on any plan. The line brightened as if the dust had found iron to borrow from itself. Then it printed 3 letters in block. HCH. Hidden, Felix murmured. Hidden connector hatch? Hand-chiseled. Loya offered from the mouth, voice reflecting off 100 ribs. Hell's closet, Halvorsen muttered. Because men with guns get a vote too. Maintenance link, Naomi said, because she liked her nouns to have time cards. Exhibit E, unauthorized connection. She took her photos like a stenographer who'd learned speed before she learned beauty. On the body cam, her voice stayed flat. Later, when she watched it in a hotel bed with the neon vacancy arguing with her eyelids, she would admire that. The echo of heels preceded the owner by a beat. Morgan Pike, late afternoon, lacquered onto her like a finish. She stepped to the chain and stopped, not yet willing to ask permission, not yet willing to be told no. Detective, she said, and there was too much steel in the vowels for the lighting. This is an active site. You can't allow dust to... She searched for a word that wouldn't sound like a headline. Contaminate our schematics. Naomi didn't turn. Ms. Pike, you are about to be served. Served with what? Morgan asked, playing the game where words make the room different if you hold them right. Naomi nodded to Halvorsen. He stepped forward and slid a manila envelope through the chain with the grace of a waiter who has learned to carry bad news well. TRO, temporary restraining order, sat on top, court seal like a coin pressed into a wound. Below it, preservation notice, subpoena dulces tecum, a smile's worth of case law. Morgan kept her face, but something about her shoes seemed to rethink their choices. She tucked the envelope under her arm like she wanted it to be a magazine. "This is an overreach," she said. "You're taking advantage of hysteria. You're letting internet hoaxes draft state policy." The dust chose that moment to misbehave beautifully. It lifted around Morgan's flats in a neat little ring and rose to ankle height, then scrolled outward like a curtain opening to reveal nothing but floor. On the deck, letters formed in the same packed crispness as tomorrow is on the docket. They spelled her name, just her first name, Morgan. She didn't step back. Naomi gave her that. Her face did a small, honest thing, the kind of fear you get when a room you don't believe in knows your baptismal record. "Exhibit F," Naomi said, keeping her voice deadpan because she could. "Interested party present." Morgan found her air. "You've got a vandal with a smoke machine," she said, and the word smoke landed wrong in a room that had shown them where the air would have stopped. "Red Mesa will pursue damages for interference. We will not be intimidated by evidence," Naomi said. "That's the word you're allergic to. You should get shots." Behind Morgan, two miners had paused at the chain the way men pause at train tracks when they hear a rumor the train is already past. One of them saw the maintenance hatch photo on Naomi's laminate and made the sound men make when something clicks and a bad memory suddenly has a diagram. "Detective," he said, voice browned by dust. "We've been smelling egg in 4 for a week on second shift. They told us the monitors were in calibration. We used our own sniffer and got nothing. Guess why?" He peered at the hacksaw shim photo and swore, quietly. "They were pinning the plate. Names," Naomi said, and he gave them, and Ruiz wrote them down like communion. The room exhaled. How? There was no mechanism. That was the point. But inside Naomi's chest the pressure eased a notch, and in Felix's spectrogram the infrasonic band did a tiny, elegant phase shift at the same moment. The collars did not attempt to seat. The infrasound sulked, then held. Naomi took the braid of sage from her pocket, not to wave or burn, but to feel the shape of something someone had handed her that wasn't a memo. "On the record," she said, "we will file. We will lock out. We will open that plate and let the room you want to kill breathe into the desert where it belongs." The dust made one last annotation on her laminate. A date, tomorrow's. A time, 9:55. It wrote, in small type like a clerk saving ink, "Stay or sentence stands." "Message received," Naomi said. "We'll see you at 9:55 with cannons, seals, deputies, and a judge on the phone." Felix glanced up, startled. "Cannons? CO2, Naomi said. "Portable. The type fire crews use to smother confined space hotspots. If the room tries to seat itself at the mouth, we give it cold clouds that don't listen to hymns." Felix's grin showed a missing childhood orthodontist and a man who liked when physics had toys. "I'll make calls." They broke the session like a court. Mics off in order, time codes photographed, placards collected. The words on the deck, Morgan, the small injunction, the tidy manual plate, held as dust implies permanence until a boot or rain argues otherwise. Naomi shot them last and stepped away. Outside, the sky had gone thin with heat. A truck idled where idling meant worry. Journalists had found cones and learned they didn't melt. Naomi ignored cameras the way you ignore weather. She called the judge. She called Dell. She called the AG duty attorney who owed her a favor large enough to be useful and small enough to be payable. Back at the fan house, Dell's text stood by the manual plate with tools cased and ready. Eddie Voss showed up without being asked. A bruise starting under one eye like a leak. He held his hands the way men do when they've already decided which part of the truth to sell. "You know why we're here," Naomi said. He nodded. Morgan said make the myth loud. He flicked his gaze toward the horizon. Said if it was spooky, No one would believe the math. And the voice? Naomi asked. You? He snorted, disgusted with something he couldn't name. Lady, I can jam a signal and hang a speaker, but I can't make concrete say your name when I'm home asleep. Then let's file this part in your column, Naomi said. You shimmed a plate. You flashed firmware. You get a lawyer. He looked at the hacksaw blade like it had cheated on him. You going to arrest me now? Soon, Naomi said. Right now you're going to show Dell every cut you made, and then you're going to sit on a milk crate until a deputy with a paperback decides to drive you to a judge. He swallowed and nodded. Men who know tools often know when a day is over. The sun edged toward something like mercy. Naomi drove back to the mouth with 2 fire department CO2 cannons in the Tahoe and a plan to make a room choke on cold. At the berm, a small crowd had reconstituted itself in the way crowds do when they believe they deserve an ending. Deputies moved them along with the patience that gets you old. Naomi walked into the tunnel with Felix and Loya and Halvorsen. The room tasted the new metal they'd brought and flexed a low chord like a cat arching. Naomi set the cannons near the center and sighted their nozzles high, where collars like to hang. Stipulated, she said to the seam in the apex. Tomorrow at 9:55 you'll try to seat the jury. At 10, Morgan will try to hand a pen to a man who's decided not to take it. Between those, we'll decide something important. You want 13. You won't get them. The dust didn't write anything. Good. Let it keep its breath. Naomi photographed the exhibits, walked the chain one last time to feel it in her hands, and served Morgan with the injunction as the dust curled around the PR woman's shoes and then fell away. Then she locked the Tahoe, checked the cannon's gauges, and set her alarm for a time that felt like a promise. 09:00. They tried to erase the day. Sometime after midnight, the service road's gate chain lay in the dust like a shed spine. The lock, cut clean, glinted under moonlight. A water truck ghosted down the berm without headlights, brakes whispering. It wore no logo now. Someone had draped a tarp over the sides, but Naomi recognized the silhouette. Red Mesa's dust control rig, the one that usually made haul roads behave. A second pickup ran ahead of it with a bar of LEDs taped black. Its taillights winked twice at the truck as if signaling a runway. At 3:05, the tunnel camera at the mouth watched the first arc of water stitch the floor. At 3:08, the mid-chamber camera fogged with blown mist and then cleared to show the crescents dissolving, the central disc soaking to a dark coin. At 3:12, all cameras died together with the petulant blink of a breaker flipped by someone who knew which box mattered. The accelerometer on the rib wrote a single angry paragraph and fell silent. They left the place shivering and clean, the way crime scenes are when people mistake tidiness for innocence. Naomi learned it at 5:30, at the motel desk, when Halvorsen called with a voice that had decided to be efficient because the other options were indecent. Cameras cut at 3:12. Mouth is scrubbed. She was in the Tahoe before the coffee maker could promise anything. Dawn thinned the sky over the berm to the color of legal paper. Deputies met her at the tape with looks that asked who had earned a sermon. Inside, the tunnel smelled like damp rock and bad faith. The floor was awash tongue. The block letters, "Tomorrow is on the docket," had been dragged into a gray bruise. The careful cartography on the disc was gone. Only the faintest ghost of arrows showed where dust had been bullied before it drowned. "Power washed," Loya said, kneeling. "Pressure head low to keep from scoring the concrete." They knew what they were doing. Felix crouched at the boundary mixtape scar, fingers trembling with the urge to fix what he couldn't. That accelerometer rant at 3:12, somebody yanked Maine. The cameras didn't fail. They were offended. Naomi stood in the center and let the anger light her like a pilot flame. "Call utilities," she said to Ruiz. "Every meter on this line. We want the blip where somebody pretended not to be here." It took 20 minutes for the county's sleepy grid tech to fax over a usage graph that looked like a cardiogram. A little dip at 3 hours 11 minutes and 47 seconds. A surge at 3 hours 12 minutes and 5 seconds. A neat rectangle of absence where the tunnel's draw had been replaced by nothing at all. The kind of nothing you get when a breaker doesn't trip. It is persuaded. "They tried to wipe the chalkboard before class," Naomi said. "Fine. We brought our notes. They hadn't planned on Eddie Voss arriving in an ambulance, but some plans write themselves. A rancher found him hunched on a culvert lip 2 miles south, blood speaking a slow language from his eyebrow and his ribs learning a new way to count. In the black case duct taped to his wrist, a compact wideband jammer, a battery brick fat as a Bible, and 3 stencils wrapped in oilcloth. Lex Sickus, tomorrow is on the docket, and a tidy alphabet in heavy block. Ruiz met them at the clinic as the nurse hissed at Eddie for trying to sit up too soon. Eddie's mouth looked like a man had put gravel between his teeth and argued with a boot. He saw Naomi and had the good sense not to pretend surprise. "You're a busy contractor," she said. "Jammers, stencils, a breaker you can make decide it's tired. Who paid you to keep the myth hot?" He shut his eyes and made a sound like a screw giving up. "Morgan," said "Spook 'em so the numbers look like gossip." Said, "If it's a ghost story, nobody believes the airflow math." And the voice. Naomi watched his eyes for the small lie and the big one. He surprised her with contempt, the useful kind. "Lady, I can fake a lot. I can't make concrete say names when I'm not there." "Who beat you?" He tried on a shrug and winced. "2 guys with soft hands. Suits in gym shoes. Didn't like that, I kept receipts." He flicked his gaze toward the black case. "Phone's in there. Read the texts." Naomi nodded to Ruiz. "Get a warrant. Mirror the device. Bag the case." She leaned closer to Eddie. "You're under arrest for tampering, reckless endangerment, and about 5 things Dell can name better than me. But if you keep telling the truth, you get to do it from a chair instead of a cell this morning." She let him see the mercy she was rationing. "Don't die on me. It annoys my paperwork." Back at the mouth, Felix set his mics anyway, because men like Felix believe in baseline even when the table's been wiped. The anti-noise towers hummed their disagreeable hymn. The room tasted wet and sullen. Naomi walked the length of the chamber with a fresh placard, "Evidence tampered," because sometimes you label the wound before you stitch it. Morgan arrived at 8:40 with counsel in tow. A man whose tie had chosen a blue so expensive it felt like a dare. They served papers with hands that didn't shake. A petition for a temporary restraining order against Naomi personally, alleging interference with business, defamation by implication, and extrajudicial theatrics injurious to commerce. It had been typed by someone who loved adjectives the way teenagers love accelerators. Naomi read the caption, the judge's name on the assignment wheel, and the hearing time, 9:30 by phone. She called Chambers, got the clerk who sounded like she had already decided to be bored. "Counsel for petitioner on," the clerk said. "Detective Creed?" "On," Naomi said, thinking of anti-noise in human form. Morgan's lawyer cleared his throat and made the sound of velvet trying to be steel. "Your Honor, the state investigator has turned a drainage asset into a stage. We request she be enjoined from further interference." Naomi didn't waste flourishes. "Your Honor, I have photographs of an unauthorized manual plate locked half-closed by a hacksaw shim. Firmware flashed Monday night. A contractor confessing to tampering, and methane traces aligned with a choke point under galleries 4 to 7. The stage is where Dust wrote the map we just verified with a wrench." A silence like a judge reading the thing you prefer he didn't. Paper shuffled. The clerk coughed. Then the judge, dry as sagebrush. "Ms. Pike, the remedy for investigation is compliance. Motion denied. Detective, keep your logs clean. Always," Naomi said, and let herself enjoy the way Morgan's lawyer's tie lost $1 of value in a second. They drove back to the mine with Dell, because losing didn't keep Morgan from trying to win somewhere else. The fan house seals still hung like red jewelry. Dell's techs had the manual plate propped open now, the hacksaw shim bagged and labeled Voss number 1. The portable meter red cleaner, the hole where disaster would have been looked offended at being robbed. In admin, Phil from compliance hovered with a stack of papers held like a confession. "Emails you asked for," he said, and his voice had chosen Team Human. "Also, there's something." He slid over a printed screenshot, Morgan's calendar for Friday. 9:30, prep. 9:55, tunnel, final hearing. 10 o'clock, Liam's sign-off. Naomi photographed it and did not need to ask who had named the 9:55 appointment. The room had taught them the time. The calendar had obeyed. At 9:55, the mouth thrummed. The anti-noise towers drove their invisible scissors into the throat. The dust tried to stand and failed in ugly starts. The phrase stitched itself thin, like thread through wet cloth. Final hearing. That was all it could manage. Felix's spectrogram glitched into a wild scribble and then smoothed as the CO2 cannons Naomi had staged yesterday coughed cold into collar height. White clouds rolled across the arcs, shredded the beginnings of seats, made the room breathe like a beast surprised by winter. At the same minute, admin filled with the bright threat of pens. Morgan stood at the head of a glass table with a printed waiver placed like a place setting. Liam arrived with Aaron at his elbow and a face that had slept 4 hours badly and chosen right anyway. Naomi came in behind a deputy who held a phone on speaker. The judge's clerk had left the line open like oxygen. Morgan slid the paper forward. All we need is your initials here, here, and your signature. 10 seconds, Liam. Then we can all act like adults again. He didn't sit. He looked at the windows where the desert burned like a verdict the land had written first. He looked at Naomi, who didn't nod because nodding would have made it hers. He looked at Aaron, who had trained her jaw to be a hinge strong enough for a door she wanted to keep closed. He put his hands flat on the table so they would stop trying to hide. No, Morgan's smile stiffened. Don't be theatrical. Don't be lethal, Aaron said, and the word landed with a weight that silenced Phil, 2 assistants, and a plant that had done nothing wrong. Somewhere under their feet, an alarm tripped. It was small at first, the high cry of a machine that hates its job. Then it became the sound it was meant to be. Gas detect, G4. The board lit a bar of red. In the fan house, a detector that had been asleep came fully awake and did the thing it had been installed to do before men decided they knew better. Evacuate, Naomi said, and the deputy repeated it with the authority of a man who enjoys simple verbs. Dell's voice came over the radio from the belly of the mine. We've got a belch in 4. Plates open. Moving. Morgan reached for the shredder, as if paper could still win. Naomi's hand closed round her wrist. Not rough, but a hinge that didn't permit that door. We keep this one, she said. They moved. Sirens wrote their bright grammar over gravel. Men who had been planning to pretend it was another day filed out, dazed by being alive in a simple way. Liam stood in the sun and let his lungs teach his brain what air means. Aaron counted heads by names she didn't know and still counted until she got 13. Back at the mouth, the CO2 clouds thinned. The room tried one last time to gather itself into a sentence and found its grammar had been filed under irrelevant. It whispered something like a hiss, like a tire found a nail and thought better. The anti-noise arrays kept humming, pleased with their small blasphemy. By noon, Eddie Voss had given a full statement, bruises photographed, text messages imaged, bank transfers noted. A series of payments from a shell that led, with the patience of water, to a budget line in PR. By 1, Morgan's counsel had moved from adjectives to adverbs, grudgingly. By 2, Naomi had enough for cuffs that would hold in daylight. At 14:10, the mouth spoke once, thin as a letter opener. Final hearing, Friday 9:55. On the glass table at Red Mesa, the waiver sat and signed. The appointment at 10 o'clock blinked on Morgan's screen and then, when Naomi's deputy read the judge's denial into the speaker, blinked out. The morning smelled like paperwork and ozone. Naomi woke before the alarm because the room had been counting down without her. She checked the CO2 cannon's gauges one more time in the Tahoe, needles fat in the green, then split the day the way the outline in her head demanded. 2 fronts, she told Felix and Halvorsen at the berm. You hold the mouth. If it tries to seat a jury, smother the collars hard and early. Keep the phase knives singing. Record everything. Felix nodded, hands already on his laptop like a man praying to a reasonable God. Decibel traps are set. If the voice tries to climb, we'll hand it gravity. Naomi squeezed his shoulder. Don't let it talk itself into a verdict. At 9:12, she was on the service road to Red Mesa with Dell riding shotgun and a deputy in the back with a long case that could have been anything except what it actually was. A set of state seals and zip ties that made law visible. The fan house waited like a quiet engine, red tags bright as berries. On Naomi's dash, a phone blinked with the clerk's number already keyed in. The judge would be a voice in her pocket when she needed a sentence that even Morgan had to swallow. "You think they'll try something cute?" Dell asked, scanning the slope where the conveyor crawled. "They already did last night," Naomi said. "This morning they get to be boring." Inside admin, Glass insisted on importance. A pitcher of water cold enough to threaten teeth waited on a tray. Someone had polished the conference table until it could reflect a plea. Liam stood by the far wall, suit jacket too big in the shoulders as if he'd grown smaller while it hung in a closet. Erin had the look of a woman who learned a new religion from the sound of a gas alarm. Morgan arrived with a folder in red, a waiver in triplicate, tabs like flags. She laid it down with the sugar of a good hostess. "Good morning," she said, as if the words could domesticate the day. "I think we can make this painless." Naomi set her body cam on the table. Painless is a fan humming like a hymn and a plate that isn't pinned with a hacksaw. Morgan smiled, practiced. "We're all here because livelihoods matter." "Lives do," Erin said. If there was a tremor in it, she rode over it like bad road. The clock in the room was old-fashioned, a brass circle that believed in hands. At 9:50, Naomi called Felix. He answered to wind. "We're live," he said, voice tinny with tunnel. "Arrays on. Plumes are testing the edges. Hold them. We're 5 minutes out," Naomi said. She turned to Liam. "Phone." He handed it over without comment. She silenced it, then put the judge's clerk on speaker and placed the phone close to the waiver like a second kind of seal. At the mouth, the hearing began with weather. Felix watched callers try to knit and stutter, CO2 cannons aimed high and ready. He'd pre-programmed bursts, short, cold pulses timed to the room's insistence. At 9:55, the tunnel tried all rise and got L for its trouble. The white bloom from the cannons rolled through collar height and tore the hoops apart, dumping cold into the space where heads liked to pretend they were attached. The decibel traps posted along the ribs threw back a thin hiss. Complaint, not speech. The boundary mic stuttered once, as if the floor had tried to swallow a word and found it hard to chew. "Again," Felix told Halvorsen, and the deputy pulled the lever with the satisfaction of a man who had always wanted to pull a lever in a temple. At 9:57, a thread of voice skated between the anti-song and the cold. No more than a wire pulled tight across a ravine. "Sentence stands unless stayed," it rasped, each word shaved thin by the phase pattern. Felix, breathing like a runner, checked timecode. "Duly noted," he said to the seam in the apex, and hit the burst again. At 9:58 in the boardroom, Morgan slid the waiver toward Liam, tapping the signature line with a pen that gleamed like an invitation. "Initial here, and sign. I know this has been unpleasant. We can put it behind us." Naomi played the bodycam clip from yesterday, the maintenance plate with the hacksaw shim, Dell's gloved finger lifting it free, the portable meter chirping at a whiff of methane. The room's air conditioning did its best to pretend it had nothing to do with any of it. "Pending inspection, all modifications are enjoined," Naomi said, her voice flat enough to stack. She dropped the TRO next to the waiver so two kinds of paper could glare at each other. "You are served, Miss Pike. Any attempt to proceed is a violation on top of the pile you've made." Morgan's smile thinned until it was almost just teeth. "Detective, I respect your theatricality, but we have investors. We have timelines. You have a room full of men whose breath you are not allowed to balance on a signature," Naomi said. "You want a timeline? Fine. 10 o'clock, no waiver." Liam had been staring at the pen as if it were a snake that might leave if he stayed very still. He glanced at Erin. She didn't say anything. She simply set her hand on his wrist and left it there like gravity you could choose. He lifted his eyes to meet Naomi's and found in them not approval. That would have been a theft, but space. "I'm not signing," he said. At the same instant, another instrument spoke. Rage wrapped in utility. In the belly of the mine, a little square of silicon in detector G4, recently exorcised of its unauthorized ghost code, tasted methane and did the thing it was born for. The board and admin hiccuped to life, a column of lights jagging from calm to dissident red. The alarm didn't wail so much as insist. It had a voice all codes share. Get out. Dell's radio came alive with overlapping realities. We've got a spike in 4, Bat said. Plates open. Thank you very much. Airflow equalizing, but it's hot in the low room. Evacuate, Dell said, already moving, already out of the chair. To Naomi, we need doors open in 30 seconds. Naomi had her deputy on his feet with the economy of a script flipped to the end. You heard her. Full pull. Now. Morgan's face did something human at last. She lost a step. Then she reached for the shredder. Naomi's hand landed on the feeder throat first. Not hard, not theatrical. Just in the way. No, she said, and the word had the weight of a stop sign made of rebar. We keep the paper that proves you know. Suits stalled in hallways made for eye contact. A receptionist stood up with the small hunger of someone who has always wanted to yank a fire alarm. Naomi let her, and the building learned loudness. Aaron had Liam by the elbow now, steering with love disguised as brusque. In the corridor, men coming off night shift blinked at daylight that had changed tone without their permission. Move, move, Dell said. 5 syllables that managed to be a sentence and a blessing. She grabbed a hard hat off the wall and took the stairs 2 at a time, a tech behind her throwing latches in the 1,000-year-old sequence shared by sailors and miners. Open this, then that, or you die. Back at the mouth, the tunnel felt the needle of the detector as if it were a rumor and bared its teeth. Dust tried to seat itself and found cold shoulders. The voice threaded one last wire through the arrays. Sentence stands un. The words snapped apart as the cannons coughed again. A white winter poured into a fake courtroom. Stay or sentence stands, Felix muttered back, not realizing he'd borrowed the line. We heard you. At 10 o'clock to the second, admin had 2 realities in it. A waiver on a table and the absence of a pen. A board with red lights and men who had decided to be alive instead. Naomi lifted the TRO and tucked it into her jacket as if it were a body part. She caught Liam's eye as he passed. He looked terrified. It didn't disqualify him. It qualified him. The right kind of fear keeps people. Go, she told him, and he did. A hiss climbed the stairwell, air finding a new way to be. Naomi moved toward it with Dell, who had already keyed her radio to the fan house. Belch coming, Bat reported. There's a wave in the line. Doors, Dell asked, breath even. Jammed, Lori said. Manual lever stuck. On it, Dell answered, then to Naomi. If the bypass plate had been where they wanted, this would be all you need to write 13 eulogies. And a press release, Naomi said, and felt the acid of it in her throat. She forced calm into her words and her hands. I'll take the west door, you take the east. Deputy, wedge the personnel gate. I don't care about OSHA's feelings. They hit the fan house like that. Dell's team at the cage, Naomi at the wheel with a deputy wedging a pry bar where metal had learned to sulk. Somewhere down the throat of the mine, a gas wave rolled like old sin. The lever squealed. It shifted a degree and then another. Dell planted a boot and laughed once. A sailor's joke at a storm's expense. Move, you bastard, she told the metal, and it did. In admin, Morgan stood alone by the table, the shredder silent and deprived. She stared at the ensigned line as if the signature might still arrive by habit. Erin came back for her purse and met Morgan's eyes. Whatever women say to each other at such moments, they said without vowels. Erin left again with a small, real smile that had nothing to do with triumph. Back underground, air learned how to be a corridor instead of a mirror. The wave passed the open plate with the indifference of water that has been given a better path. The detector that had screamed softened to an offended beep. Still present, still warning, but no longer a countdown. Naomi, shoulder burning from the lever, felt the room, both rooms, shift. She pressed the radio. All crews accounted? She asked. Counting, Dell said. I want 13 and I want them upright. Then we'll count out loud, Naomi said and began. 1, 2. They didn't reach 13 in part 10. That was for the next page. For now there was an open door, a waiver without a signature. a tunnel sulking around a mouthful of winter, and a sentence that would have to wait its turn. Naomi stepped into the hallway and said 3 words that belonged to her job and not the desert's. Full evacuation now. As Morgan's hand hovered impotently over the shredder and Liam, white-knuckled, shook his head once and refused the pen. They counted them out loud because numbers are steadier when spoken. 1, 2, Lori up the ladder with a cough and a thumbs up. 3, 4. Bat hauling a kid-faced driller by his harness, dust making both of them the same color. 5, 6, 2 electricians with eyes like bad birthdays. 7, 8. An old-timer named Rudd who wouldn't let go of his lunch pail even while swearing to spend it on quitting. 9, 10. An oiler stumbling with gratitude and dehydration confused. 11. Dell herself, dragging a man whose boot had tried to marry a great. 12. 13. Naomi shouted before she saw the face, willing the world to match the ledger she'd written in her head. The last man came round the bulkhead in a half-crawl, knocked stupid by the alarm and the smell. Liam was there without deciding to be, catching the man under the arm with the strength that comes when guilt doesn't get its way. They spilled into daylight together. The siren's logic diminished to a nag. Someone sobbed with relief and then pretended it had been swearing. Air learned how to be a gift again. Count again, Dell said, always the auditor. They did. 13 alive pupils like doorways. Naomi radioed Felix because some balances need witnesses in both rooms. At the mouth, the anti-noise arrays kept their disagreeable hymn. Felix watched the decibel traps settle with the tender triumph of a captain nursing a damaged ship into harbor. The tunnel made a small, strangled sound, the ghost of a verdict choking on its own ceremony. Then, as if the room had been notified by paperwork, the infrasound turned a fraction in phase. A graph on Felix's screen did a tidy pivot, a hinge more than a swing. It was nothing the crowd outside would have heard, but to a man who had taught himself to read buildings like scores, it was a key change. He thumbed his radio. "Detective," he said, voice shaking in his own ears. "We just had a phase shift at 09:59 and change. It tracked the alarm clearing your board." "Say it," Naomi told him, because sometimes you need the line in the air. "Stay granted," he said, and felt foolish and then less so when the room, thin as paper and twice as cutting, echoed him. Just once, just enough. "Stay granted," the mouth whispered. It wasn't triumph. It was clerical. Naomi preferred it that way. She turned from the fan house to the glass hall where Morgan stood with her folder and no day left. The PR woman had that particular pallor of a plan denied oxygen. Her counsel recovered first, brandishing adjectives like talismans. Naomi let him spend them. Then she stepped into the space where arguing ends and law begins. "Morgan Pike," she said, voice level. "You are under arrest for tampering with safety equipment, reckless endangerment, and conspiracy to obstruct a state investigation." Counsel inhaled to object and found no air he owned. Naomi kept it clean, hands light but unarguable as she turned Morgan, cuffed her with the small mercy of checking wrists, read her the words that come out of a body like muscle memory when you've said them enough. Morgan made a small, incredulous laugh at the anything you say part, and then did not say anything. Eddie Voss watched from a chair in the shade, butterfly bandage on his eyebrow and a deputy for a shadow. He looked smaller without the case that had made him feel like a man who could tilt rooms. When Naomi glanced his way, he gave a nod that was not forgiveness but a receipt. "You got what I paid for." Up the service road, Irene Blackbird walked with the gravity of women who bring the correct thing at the correct time. She did not ask permission of cones. She did not ask permission of deputies. She stopped at the portal and took the braid of sage from her bag, twin to the one in Naomi's pocket, the red thread winking like a heartbeat in her hand. She did not light it. She simply laid it on the lip of concrete where flood and rumor pass each other like cousins who don't speak. "Debt paid," she said to the mouth. In action, not fear. Dust lifted as if a breath had been held too long and let go. The seam along the apex seemed less like a bruise and more like a tired muscle. Irene's eyes found Naomi's in the shade. One nod. A ledger closed without a slam. Naomi let herself stand still for the length of 2 slow inhales. Then she was moving again because days like this keep their own calendars. She walked the corridor by admin with Aaron, whose hand still held Liam's wrist as if dragging him back into the life he'd almost forfeited by habit. "You stopped," Naomi said to him, not a question. "I didn't sign," he said. He touched the spot on the table where the line had waited for him and shook his head once like a man waking from a trick. "I'll resign instead. They can have the job. They can't have the air." Aaron's smile was small and ferocious. "He'll sleep like a baby who owes taxes," she said. "Which is better than a widow." Dell intercepted Naomi with the grim cheer of a surgeon after a bad one that turned good. Plates open, locks installed. Firmware re-imaged to the manufacturer's blessed boredom. "We'll write them a code so thick they'll have to read it aloud at staff meetings." "Cite everything," Naomi said. "Leave them no verbs." They walked back to the mouth because closure, when available, is best delivered in person. Felix had killed the CO2 cannons. The arrays idled, ready to bite again if the room tried a sermon. The central disk still held the scuffed ghost of yesterday's map. The crescents looked like silly scratches again. Tomorrow is on the docket had been dragged by water into a bruise, then by boots into a rumor. Good. Let language do some honest work for once. Naomi stepped into the ring one more time. She spoke the way you speak to a clerk on a good day. Level, specific, grateful that paper has corners. "On the record," she said. 13 filed out. Plate opened. Alarm worked. Signature withheld. Human hands made the danger. Human hands undid it. Stay is granted. The room did not answer with Latin. It answered with weather. A wind devil the height of a child spun itself just outside the mouth, lifted a crescent of dust, and this matter did not seat. It unraveled with a bored shrug and moved on to bother a mesquite that did not care. Felix packed his mics like instruments after a show that had ended on time. "Whatever we did here," he said, "the room has less appetite for theater." "It'll get hungry again," Naomi said. "We feed it regs and repairs." Loya photographed the last of it because evidence loves punctuation. Halvorsen leaned on the cooler and drank water with the relief men sometimes misname. Ruiz checked his phone and grinned like a man who sees warrants ripening on their trees. The cuffs shone briefly in the sun on Morgan's wrists as a deputy led her to the Tahoe. She did not beg. She did not rage. She watched the tunnel the way a gambler watches a table that has started to dislike him. "You'll spin this," Naomi said, not unkindly. "You always do, but tomorrow's docket is clean." Morgan's mouth made a line. "You think the story ends because you say it does." "I think endings are stories too," Naomi said. "We're just better at choosing ours than rooms are." They processed the site until afternoon lost its teeth. Statements gathered themselves on paper. The judge, who had tried not to care and failed, signed the charges with a note that was almost a compliment. Sustained on facts. The AG's office typed a press release so careful it squeaked. Phil from compliance brought Naomi a brown envelope and put it on the table like a heart. Copies of emails he should have burned and didn't. Sun leaned west. The mouth breathed like a culvert again. Not a church. Naomi should have driven to the motel and let sleep sell her on the idea of being a person. Instead, she ducked back under the berm alone, turned her lamp low, and stood in the ring long enough to be sure she wasn't needed. "Case stays open," she told the concrete, "because some clerks like updates. But the sentence is off." If the tunnel had a reply, it kept it. Good. She had files to write. Outside, Irene had moved her chair into the longer shade. She watched Naomi the way mountains do, without claim. "You'll come back tomorrow," she said. "Not prophecy. Calendar." "I'll come back when men try to make paper breathe," Naomi said. Irene's smile creased all the right places. "Then you will never run out of work." The stars arrived on schedule. The desert, rude with honesty, wrote nothing on them. Naomi locked the Tahoe, checked the case file's growing spine, and made a list for one last part. Charges, reports, the line in her notes she already knew how to write. Asterisk, asterisk, pre-crime is a superstition until someone signs. We stopped a signature. Asterisk, asterisk. Hashtag, 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 part 12, verdict in the sand. Paper is slower than weather, but it wins by staying. A week later, Naomi sat in a hearing room with bad carpet watching paper do what the desert had tried to impersonate. Morgan Pike faced the judge with a calm that looked rented. The charges stacked in tidy clauses. Tampering with safety equipment, reckless endangerment, conspiracy to obstruct an investigation. Her counsel pled not guilty because that is what counsel does when money is still in the account. The prosecutor, careful to boredom, outlined the hacksaw shim, the firmware flash, the water truck at 305, the shell payments to a contractor who had discovered he was breakable. Eddie Voss, eyebrow healed into a pink hyphen, took a plea with the tough grace of a man who knows his tools and his odds. He would testify to the shim, the firmware, the midnight errands, the instructions from a PR office that did not want fingerprints on air. He would spend some time where time goes to think. He would emerge to a county that forgets and remembers with the same skill. Red Mesa Lithium settled like corporations do. A consent decree with numbers that looked large in a headline and adequate in a ledger. The ventilation was rebuilt to code thick enough to choke an egregore. The state slapped on fines and mandatory training that would force men to say out loud the words they'd always known. Air does not negotiate. Naomi read each order twice, not because she doubted them, but because she liked the sound of paper understanding its job. The technical report came last, as they do, binding itself with the thread of caution scientists use when superstition is circling. Dr. Felix Rowe wrote most of it, assisted by a civil engineer from the state and a seismologist who treated infrasound like a weather pattern. Their conclusions spoke plain. Tunnel geometry primed the ear for voices. Pressure nodes created cold plumes that mimicked presence. Low-frequency resonance amplified rumor into ritual. Human fraud, stencils, jammers, staged phrases poured gasoline on it. Unresolved, the articulate voice producing proper nouns from no discernible source. Recommendation: control geometry at the site during weather events. Limit gatherings. Starve the room of posture and spectacle. Continue monitoring. Naomi sent a copy to Irene, who would not read the graphs but would understand the recommendation better than most. The day the report cleared counsel, Naomi went back to the mouth with a deputy who wore his hat as if hats had decided on him. The portal had collected a week's worth of tumble and the scent a place gets when you have been keeping it out of the news. A chain hung across the entrance with a new, larger lock and a sign that said closed for maintenance in a font that made deputies feel less alone. She signed the log, ducked under, and walked to the chamber. Felix had asked her to run a quick check. Battery recorder only, no arrays, no stage. She liked how that sounded. The room felt empty is the wrong word. Quieter, as if it had learned to keep some of its music to itself. The crescents on the floor were almost gone, erased by water and time and deputies making sure no teenager mistook folklore for sport. The central disc still held the ghost of a map if you knew where to look. Tomorrow is on the docket had been reduced to a smudge you could pass without noticing. Naomi raised her lamp to the dates wall. The old cuts waited: 1958, 1962, 1979, 1993, 2006, 2017, 2019, 2022. The shallow edition from that fraught morning, 1962, Elias Seda, had weathered into the same register as the rest, as if the clerk had found the correct ink. Beneath it, fresh as gilt, another line had appeared in a neat, almost schoolroom hand. Case: people versus silence. Disposition: ongoing. She stood there longer than she needed to, because some sentences want company. Then she raised the body cam and took the picture anyway. Evidence is not a prayer, but it listens like one. She stepped to the center. Her boots found the edge of the old polish. She didn't ask the room to speak. She told it what it had gotten. On the record, she said softly. Morgan Pike charged. Eddie Voss pled. Red Mesa fined and rebuilt. Fans sing boring hymns. Plates open. Alarms awake. The boy who skated here now runs laps on a track that smells like rubber and sun. If you were waiting for breath to be kept, it won't be by paper. Not here. The room answered with nothing, which was right. She could hear the highway through concrete and the scrape of something small. Lizard, mouse, translating geology into errands. Her phone buzzed once. Dell, sending a photo from Gallery 4. New seals sparkling like jewelry. A hand-scrawled sign above the manual plate that said, "Don't even think about it." Someone had drawn a smiley face that failed at joy but succeeded at warning. She walked out into day. Irene was in the shade again, chair tilted, hands folded the way you fold them when you've taught yourself to be patient with other people's deadlines. "You brought the right words," Irene said. "Paper words," Naomi said. "That's the kind that stay," Irene said. She nodded at the portal. "The other kind fade if you feed them nothing." Naomi handed her a copy of the technical summary like a person bringing bread that tastes of equations. Irene held it as if it might need warming. "You want me to bless the mouth?" she asked, tone light. "I want you to keep reminding it what was paid," Naomi said. She took the braid of sage from her pocket, the one Irene had given her on a day that had tried to be a prophecy, and set it on the berm beside Irene's fresh one, red threads winking like a punctuation mark shared between sentences. "Debt paid," Irene said again, same words, new day. "And you?" She tilted her head at Naomi. "You write good ledgers. Clerks with long pencils," Naomi said, thinking of her note the way you think of a thing you already know how to write. "We get to close some lines." She closed one more that afternoon, in the kind of office that thinks glass is a cure. She typed a final page on the case with the calm of a hand that doesn't need to shake anymore. Asterisk pre-crime is a superstition until someone signs. "We stopped the signature." Asterisk. She added the part after the comma, the part that would make patrol officers snort and scientists lift an eyebrow and Irene laugh without noise. If a room insists on saying your name, answer with a valve, a rule, a phone call that puts air back where gossip wanted to live. The AG's press release landed the next morning. It was careful enough to irritate people who wanted ghosts and clear enough to satisfy those who wanted gear ratios. Reporters came anyway, folded shirts and sad microphones. Naomi said the sentence she'd already typed and refused to say the ones they could splice into a viral clip. Felix spoke about nodes and collars. Dell talked about plates and locks. Irene didn't come to the microphones at all, which may have been the smartest move anyone made. When the cameras left, Beatty resumed its preferred schedule. Morning deliveries, afternoon heat, teenagers mapping boredom into routes that avoided news. Owen Calder jogged past the school's chain-link fence with a baton in his fist and the kind of uneven stride that means you're curing a habit. Aaron planted basil in a too-hot planter and dared it to live. Liam filled out a resignation he would not regret, traded a safety vest for a quieter color, and took a breath he would have owed to names if the day had gone the other way. Naomi took a day, then two, and used one to read novels with no clerks in them. It didn't take. She drove out to the mouth after dark once, alone because superstition likes to be surveilled. The stars said nothing new. The tunnel's note was a private hum 3 miles south. Traffic, wind, somebody's swamp cooler fighting a losing battle. She stood at the chain, listened until she could tell the difference between a culvert and a court, and laughed at herself for needing to. Then she drove home because home is where you keep your tools and your boots and the promises you made to yourself about sleep. On her last visit before the file went to deep storage, she found a wind devil playing above the berm. It pulled a crescent of dust off the lip and twirled it for 3 slow rotations before unraveling like a bored dancer. It did not seat. It declared no verdict. It hit a mesquite and fell apart laughing. Naomi saluted it because you should be polite to weather. She shot a final still of the portal with the chain and the sign and the sage, printed it on cheap paper in black and white, and slid it into the back of the file. If some clerk opened the box in 10 years, they'd get a photograph of a mouth that learned its job. Swallow floods, not names. She turned off the desk lamp, wrote the case number on the spine with a pen that had not been used for a waiver, and put the file in its place. The shelf accepted the weight the way shelves do. Her phone buzzed with a new call starting somewhere else, some other room that wanted to be louder than law. "Bring a light," she said to no one, and locked the door. And that was minutes of a future crime. A story about how a tunnel in the Nevada desert tried to hand down verdicts, and how one investigator reminded it that only the living get to decide who breathes. If you stayed with us through the dust, the voices, and the verdict that almost was, thank you. Every listen, every quiet minute you give to these stories, is what keeps Somnolent Conspiracies alive. If you found yourself holding your breath along with Naomi Creed, we invite you to stay with us for more. Subscribe, ring the bell, and leave a like. It's a small gesture that helps us keep telling long, sleepless tales of detectives, hauntings, and the strange ways law and legend collide. As always, remember our sign-off. Every shadow carries a story, and we'll be here to tell it. Thank you for listening.